Jaime Lannister had never liked the way the wind whistled through the whispering wood. On quiet nights, with the moon tucked behind a blanket of gray clouds, one could almost think the wind was mocking. It was neither a roar nor a howl. It was a low, mournful murmur that rattled leaves and set the branches trembling, as if the forest itself knew far more than any living man. Still, Jaime thought it a pretty place to die, if dying had been on his agenda. Yet he was Jaime Lannister, and he had no intention of drawing his last breath that night. His armor shone, even in the gloom, and his white cloak, tucked snugly over his gilded plate, looked like a beacon meant to shame the darkness. From across the clearing, he sensed arrows waiting to fly, the hush of hidden men, and the press of a silent threat. But Casterly Rock Gold had been put to better uses than forging his armor. He was no easy foe. The young wolf might have thought to lure him into a trap, but Jaime Lannister was not so easily caged. He sat astride his warhorse, reins loose in one hand. A lesser man might have felt the chill, might have shivered in that wood, especially with the rumors that wolves were near. But Jaime's blood was warm and his spirit bold, and the thought of fighting set his heart beating in eager anticipation. The boy who led the northern host, Robb Stark, was only some 15 or 16 summers old, yet they said he had bested the Lannister armies at Riverrun through cunning. Some whispered he was blessed by the old gods. Others said he was a whelp of no great note, simply lucky. Jaime intended to discover the truth for himself. He had marched through the Riverlands, hunting the boy wolf, aiming to crush the North's rebellion in a single decisive stroke. He might have done it that very evening, had the tide of battle shifted as it was meant to, but Robb Stark had other ideas. A faint rustling in the trees betrayed the presence of Stark outriders, or archers, or something else. Jaime glanced over his shoulder to see his own men forming a loose wedge behind him. A wall of steel and grim-eyed determination. Ser Adam Marbrand was stationed to the left with a detachment of cavalry, while the infantry sprawled behind in ragged columns. They were men exhausted from long days of marching, but the Lannister lion on their banners still caught the scant moonlight and declared their presence. Jaime was no fool. The North had lured him into this forest, anticipating that the thick trunks would hamper his cavalry and give the young wolf's footmen the advantage. And indeed it had looked like a trap. But the Lannisters had their own scouts, and Jaime had not allowed himself to be neatly encircled. The maneuvering that night resembled a deadly dance in darkness, the steps guided by torches and moonlit glimpses. One false turn and one side would be devoured. Yet the pivotal moment came when Jaime heard the cry of a horn, and he recognized at once that he had not ridden far enough into Robb Stark's jaws for the trap to snap shut. Now it was the Lannisters who had the edge. They had not pressed too far into the thick of the wood, and their flanks remained somewhat open. 100 steps deeper and there would have been no retreat, but Jaime possessed too keen an instinct for danger. He waved a gauntlet hand. His standard-bearers advanced, raising lanterns to signal that the line should pull back slowly. At the same time, his eyes surveyed every glimmer among the leaves, searching for archers. Another horn call sounded, a desperate, trumpeting note. That was no Lannister horn. The young wolf's men, prepped for an ambush, found themselves ill-positioned for a head-on charge in a forest where the Lannister force had not fully committed. Jaime's cavalry advanced in disciplined ranks. Steel clashed. Hoofs churned up the muddy forest floor. The boys' forces fought bravely, but it was the wrong place and the wrong time for Robb Stark's cunning to pay off. Jaime's horsemen hammered the scattered northerners, while the main bulk of Robb's host waited further in, uncertain how to best engage without blocking their own men. At that critical juncture, Jaime spotted a banner of gray and white, the direwolf sigil. A cluster of men around it struggled to reposition, and for a moment Jaime thought he glimpsed the young wolf himself, though it was difficult to see in the gloom. He drove his stallion forward. He had dreamt of facing Ned Stark in single combat once, merely to test his skill against the famed warrior. But Eddard Stark lay headless in the dungeons of King's Landing, undone by court intrigue, so the young wolf was the next best challenge. How sweet it might be to bring that young head before the Iron Throne. Jaime spurred his horse through the melee, seeing only glimpses of fur-clad warriors and men shouting in the northern tongue. They put up a fierce defense, but they were out of position. Jaime had the momentum. He cut down 2 men in quick succession, the first with a thrust to the throat, the second with a slice that parted helmet from scalp. He saw the swirl of a dark cloak, but the figure vanished behind a rearing horse as Jaime's own steed plowed onward. Iron rang on iron. Shouts and oaths hung in the damp air. In the chaos, it became clear that the Northerners had lost the advantage. Their archers attempted to take positions in higher ground among the trees, but Ser Adam's cavalry was upon them in an instant, smashing lines, scattering men who were not prepared to fight mounted knights on open ground. Where the dense forest pressed, the foemen fought valiantly, but the Lannisters were not pinned as planned. A horn bellowed anew, and Jaime recognized it for what it was, a signal to withdraw. The young wolf was cutting his losses. He would not emerge to be surrounded, or so Jaime surmised. Instead, he would save the bulk of his forces for another day. In that swirl of blood and moonlight, the Lannisters seized the upper hand, punching through pockets of resistance until the northern lines melted into the deeper folds of the forest, vanishing from sight. Come daylight, Jaime surveyed the carnage. He had won, albeit narrowly. Perhaps if the young wolf had closed the jaws of his trap more quickly, Jaime would have been a prisoner, or worse. But fortune favored the bold. The Lannister men had secured the clearing, and though the dead were many, both Lannister and Northmen, they still held a coherent host. Jaime had not been captured. He was free, very much alive, and ready to continue the war in Tywin Lannister's name. When he thought of that fact alone, his lips curved into a golden, confident smile. He pictured Tywin's face if word arrived that Jaime had been bested. Tywin would have been livid, and that might be an understatement. But here Jaime stood, unbowed, unchained, all thanks to good timing and the gods' favor. The Whispering Wood would not become his prison. In the following days, the Lannister host regrouped, burying its dead, tending to the wounded, forging ahead. Rumors were that Robb Stark had retreated toward the twins, seeking to consolidate with whatever allies remained. Jaime took time to interrogate prisoners, a grim process made easier by the presence of men like Gregor Clegane. Where intimidation did not suffice, the Mountain's brutality often did. Information came in trickles. The boy had marched swiftly, pushing deeper into the Riverlands than expected. But now the Northmen had lost the element of shock, and a second Lannister army under Tywin or Tyrion, or both, would soon push up the King's Road. Jaime relished the possibility of cornering the young wolf between two lions' jaws. Though the battle was far from decided, the tide was turning. No one had anticipated that Jaime would emerge from the Whispering Wood with so many men intact, least of all the Northerners themselves. The days stretched into weeks as the Lannister forces advanced. Jaime, who had always found the Riverlands a rather lovely place, rolling fields, winding rivers, quaint villages, now saw the land ravaged by war. Farms burned, families scattered, bandits prowled the roads. Everywhere the common folk cursed the war, caring little for which lord wore the crown so long as their fields were spared. Jaime felt a touch of disdain for their weakness, but he was not heartless enough to ignore the misery. War devoured the small folk first. He also knew that the deeper his men went, the more precarious supply lines became. Yet Tywin Lannister was cunning. If all went according to plan, King's Landing would continue to funnel gold and resources to the Lannister armies, ensuring they never lacked for provisions. One late afternoon, as Jaime's host approached an abandoned farmstead near the Red Fork, they spied a column of smoke rising lazily against the sky. Raiders or northern outriders might still be in the vicinity, so Jaime ordered a detachment to ride ahead. With him went a handful of knights and crossbowmen, just in case. They found a small group of terrified peasants huddled by a destroyed barn. They had no illusions that Jaime and his men would bring them salvation. They were more fearful than hopeful. A single old woman dared to step forward, wrinkled hands trembling, to beg that they be spared. Jaime regarded her with a kind of distant pity. This was the face of war, broken souls, broken walls, broken futures. He gave the group orders not to harass the peasants, and they left a half-bag of grain behind, courtesy of the half-burned local granary. It was not truly an act of generosity but of practicality. If the peasants survived, the farms might still produce something the Lannisters could later requisition. Yet, as Jaime rode away, he felt a twinge of guilt. Once he might have scoffed at such sentiment. But while he scorned the hypocrisy of some knights, he did believe in a certain code of chivalry, though it often warred with his pragmatic side. His musings were interrupted by the arrival of a Lannister scout galloping to meet him. The man had dirt on his cheeks and wore a battered leather jerkin that bore the Golden Lion sigil. He reported that a northern party, large enough to be of concern, was moving swiftly along the Green Fork, possibly headed for Moat Cailin, possibly to intercept them. Jaime questioned the man closely, verifying the rumor. Moat Cailin was the key to the north, yes, but that strategic fortress had limited significance if Robb Stark was still on the offensive. Another possibility, the young wolf was attempting to flank Jaime's position and catch him off guard. Yet the Lannister scouts insisted it did not look like an attacking force. More likely, it was a retreat. If that were so, Robb was ceding the southern riverlands to the Lannisters, preserving his strength for a northern defense. The boy must have realized he was in a precarious position now that Jaime had slipped free of the Whispering Wood. The news drew a sharp grin across Jaime's face. Tyrion would have teased him about his vanity, but he could not help feeling pleased. Having no chain around his neck made all the difference in the world. Jaime set his men on a forced march. He intended to chase down Robb Stark if indeed the young wolf was part of the retreating force and bring him to heel. Weeks of continuous movement took them across scorched fields and over precarious river crossings. He heard that Catelyn Stark, Robb's mother, was rumored to be riding with her son. Tales of her fierce grief and her unwavering resolve had spread among soldiers. It was said she was desperate to reclaim her daughters from King's Landing. Jaime found it almost admirable. He had once made a vow to protect the Stark girls himself under the King's Guard oath, but that vow had been overshadowed by new loyalties to House Lannister and especially to Cersei. He did not dwell on that contradiction too long. Oaths were flexible when power was at stake, or perhaps that was his cynicism speaking. Eventually, the Lannisters learned that the Starks had indeed pulled back into the territory near Moat Cailin, that ancient ruin guarding the Neck, a fortress notoriously difficult to take if the defenders were determined. Winterfell was far to the north, and if Robb held Moat Cailin, he could keep the Lannisters out of the north indefinitely. Jaime relayed intelligence to Tywin. Their best chance might be to corner the boy in the Riverlands before he could slip away behind those tall, swampy defenses. But Tywin's attention was divided. The news from King's Landing was that King Joffrey, in one of his temper tantrums, had demanded harsh reprisals against the north. Meanwhile, Stannis Baratheon had declared himself king on Dragonstone, and Renly Baratheon was amassing supporters in the Reach. The War of the Five Kings was truly upon them, and each front demanded more soldiers, more gold, more cunning. Yet Tywin Lannister was not the type of man to be overwhelmed. He simply delegated tasks efficiently. And so, Jaime Lannister took on the role of continuing the pursuit of the young wolf. The next skirmishes were small-scale. Northern outriders tested Lannister supply lines, ambushing convoys or burning fodder meant for the warhorses. Jaime responded by sending swift cavalry to run down these raiders, and occasionally they managed to capture a few. The information gleaned was always a mixture of truth and rumor, but Jaime concluded that Robb Stark was indeed consolidating toward Moat Cailin, gathering his outriders and any remnants from earlier battles. Meanwhile, Walder Frey at the Twins was stirring up trouble, complaining about the presence of northern forces near his precious crossing, even though the old man had allegedly sworn fealty to the Starks. True to his nature, Walder Frey was playing both sides, sending messages to Tywin as well, stating that if Jaime arrived at the Twins, House Frey might be more inclined to bend the knee to the Lannisters. Jaime found that notion entertaining. Cunning old weasel, he thought, but it might prove useful in the days ahead. Amid these political machinations, the nights were long, the days were a blur of marching, drilling, and waiting. Armies in the field had no shortage of monotony in between battles. Jaime's men, weary from the rigors of campaign, set up camp on a stony ridge overlooking the Green Fork one evening. A watch was posted along the perimeter, and though many men tried to rest, Jaime himself felt restless. Memories of the narrow escape in the Whispering Wood haunted him still, that had been too close, far too close. In another life, he might already have been chained in Riverrun's dungeons, or worse, paraded around as a hostage. The wolf pack would have forced Tywin's hand by threatening Jaime's life. That scenario, once so close to fruition, now lay firmly in the realm of what if. Life hinged on the smallest twists of fate, and Jaime was freshly reminded of that. He thought of Tyrion, who thrived on cunning and improbable escapes, and smirked. Perhaps there was more of Tyrion in him than he cared to admit. When dawn broke over that camp, the sky was a dull gray tinged with pink, and the cawing of crows told Jaime there were bodies nearby. War's presence was rarely subtle. He was just about to mount his horse for another day's march when a courier from his father arrived, bearing a message sealed with the Lannister lion. Jaime's mood lifted briefly at the prospect of news from Tywin. He tore it open. The contents revealed that Lord Tywin had brokered a new arrangement with some of the lords of the Trident, men who had once sworn to House Tully but might now consider changing allegiance if the young wolf's campaign continued to falter. Jaime was to press his advantage and, if possible, take Riverrun. If Riverrun fell, the River Lords would have little choice but to submit or face retribution. The letter also demanded daily updates on Jaime's position. So Tywin was pulling the strings, orchestrating a tapestry of alliances, betrayals, and brutality. Jaime rolled the parchment, slipped it inside his tunic, and smiled. Riverrun was the seat of House Tully, and the Tully banners still rallied behind Robb Stark and his cause. Its capture would be a blow to the boys' morale. The fortress was not easily taken, but it was also not as formidable as Moat Cailin. Jaime had already made a run at Riverrun earlier, but the attempt faltered because the northern relief arrived. This time, things might be different. He dispatched a reply to Tywin, declaring his intent to besiege Riverrun soon and requesting additional siege engines. Then Jaime called a war council in the open air, summoning his captains, Ser Adam Marbrand, the Mountain That Rides, and a handful of other notable knights. Their camp spread across the ridge, tents flapping in a persistent breeze that carried the scent of damp earth. A makeshift table sat on the grass with a crude map weighed down by stones. Jaime traced the route to Riverrun with a leather-gloved finger. They spoke in low tones about crossing certain fords, about ensuring the safety of supply wagons, about the possibility that Edmure Tully might still command enough men to contest them. Gregor Clegane rumbled that fear alone would make the small folk submit, and they had only to set an example by sacking a few key villages. Jaime regarded the mountain with distaste, but he did not contradict him outright. Terror was a weapon, the one Jaime did not relish. Eventually, the council concluded, and their plan was set. They would pivot westward to lay siege to Riverrun, while a smaller detachment remained to harass any Stark outriders that lingered near the Green Fork. They marched with renewed purpose. Instead of mindless pursuit, they had a clear target. Riverrun. Jaime felt a ripple of excitement in his veins. He might well be the man to force the Tullis capitulation, and that would be a triumph to bolster House Lannister's prestige. All the while, though, the war expanded in other directions. Word filtered through that Renly Baratheon had declared himself king in Highgarden, forging alliances with the Tyrells. Stannis remained brooding on Dragonstone. Balon Greyjoy had begun to stir in the Iron Islands. The realm was fracturing. But Jaime's world was focused on one thing: deny Robb Stark any further victories and secure the Riverlands for the Lannisters. As they neared Riverrun, they encountered the aftermath of earlier skirmishes. Bodies hung from trees, some bearing the sigil of the fish, some the lion. Flies buzzed in thick clouds around the rotting corpses. Jaime's men grew quiet. Even hardened soldiers disliked the sight of men left to rot. This was the Tully homeland, and war had carved a path of ruin through it. Jaime wondered if the Tully small folk still believed in knights and heroes. Perhaps once they had sung songs about fair lords and ladies in those green fields. Now, the only song was the stench of death. The fortress of Riverrun finally came into view on the horizon. Its sandstone walls were set at the confluence of the Red Fork and the Tumblestone rivers, a natural defense that had earned it a reputation for being nearly impregnable. Jaime studied it from a distance, recalling how the castle's moat could be flooded by the river. The Tully fish banners fluttered at half a dozen ramparts. He had heard that Edmure Tully, wounded though he might be, still held command there. Jaime resolved to meet the challenge directly. The Lannisters numbered in the thousands, enough to mount a siege, though whether they could storm the walls remained uncertain. But if siege engines arrived, they might breach the fortress. And if not, they might starve the defenders out. It would take time, but the Tullys were vulnerable to isolation now that the Northmen had withdrawn. The Lannister camps encircle the castle on the western and southern sides, while outriders patrolled the northern approaches, cutting off access. The river still flowed, but the Lannisters aimed to block supply boats if at all possible. Under the watchful eyes of Tully archers, Jaime's men set about constructing palisades and digging trenches for a protracted siege. He felt a grim satisfaction as he rode along the line, clad in the gilded armor that had been polished anew. The Tully banners snapped in defiance on the distant walls, but soon their proud fish would wonder if help was ever coming. The young wolf, if he truly was en route to Moat Cailin, would not appear to break the siege. And if Robb did attempt it, then Jaime would force a battle in open ground, exactly the scenario the boy had hoped to avoid. In the early days of the siege, the Tully defenders tested the Lannisters with sudden sallies, hoping to catch them unprepared. One night, a party of Tully knights and men-at-arms slipped out of a postern gate and attempted to burn the Lannister supply wagons. They were partially successful, destroying some food stores and setting off chaos among the watch. But Gregor Clegane and his men responded with brutal efficiency, driving the Tully raiders back into the moat. Some drowned in their heavy armor weighed down by chainmail. Others died on Lannister swords. Jaime commended the men for repelling the attack, yet inwardly he cursed the Tully nerve. They were not as timid as he had hoped. So, the cat-and-mouse game continued. Another day, the Tully archers loosed volley after volley at the laborers building siege ramps, forcing them to retreat. Jaime decided to bide his time until the heavier siege equipment arrived from the Gold Road. Tyrion might have teased him for a lack of patience, but Jaime had learned that certain tasks required a steady hand, not just bold charges. Weeks passed. The Lannister siege lines tightened, but the Tully still held firm, occasionally receiving small shipments of supplies from cunning smugglers who navigated the rivers at night. It was not enough to relieve the siege entirely, but it prevented immediate starvation. Meanwhile, the realm's larger war churned on. Ravens brought word that Renly Baratheon had been slain, some said by shadow magic, which Jaime found laughable, but stranger things had happened in that world. Now Stannis threatened King's Landing itself. Joffrey remained on the Iron Throne, and Cersei was rumored to be fortifying the city's defenses with wildfire. None of that changed Jaime's mission to secure the Riverlands, keep House Tully under the Lannister thumb, and ensure that Robb Stark could not meddle here again. The boy had vanished into the neck, or so it was believed. Without Edmure Tully's open support, the scattered Riverlords might bend the knee to Tywin one by one. One crisp morning, after a cold rain had fallen all night, a column of reinforcements arrived from the west, complete with trebuchets and catapults. At last, Jaime had the means to press the siege in earnest. He held a council of war beneath a crimson Lannister pavilion, a stark contrast to the muddy ground. Large swaths of the encampment were slick with water, and men coughed in the damp. The air smelled of wet horses, burning wood, and cooked onions from the camp kitchens. The knights gathered around, their cloaks soggy. Ser Adam Marbrand spoke of attacking the lower curtain wall with repeated bombardments. Another knight proposed a night assault on a less guarded section of the ramparts. Gregor Clegane merely grunted that it would be faster to starve them out. Jaime weighed the options. He did not relish the idea of a drawn-out starvation siege, for it tied up his army and prevented them from engaging threats elsewhere. But if a direct assault ended in failure, the losses would be staggering. Eventually, Jaime decided on a methodical bombardment by day, combined with harassment at night. They would deny the Tullys any rest, break their morale, and pound the walls relentlessly. In the gloom of early morning, the catapults launched their first volley. Stones crashed against Riverrun's walls, reverberating like thunder. Archers on the battlements answered with flights of arrows, some of which fell short or glanced off the wooden mantlets shielding the siege crews. The assault was not a single climactic moment, but a slow grind of warfare. Dust and smoke filled the air. The defenders hurried to shore up damaged sections, while the Lannisters tested every weak spot. Day after day, the catapults and trebuchets hurled stones. Sometimes flaming missiles soared overhead, trailing sparks as they arced toward the fortress. The Tully defenders valiantly attempted to douse the flames, though the fortress's high walls gave them some advantage. Jaime rode among the siege lines, ensuring discipline. He wore a half-helm this time, battered from the repeated use, though the golden hair that spilled beneath it still gleamed. He paused to exchange a few words with the chief engineer, who was complaining about the shortage of good timber for counterweights. Jaime offered a quick promise that more timber would be cut from the surrounding forests. There was no shortage of trees, only time and manpower. The Tullys rained arrows down on anyone who ventured too close, so retrieving and hauling logs was dangerous work. But that was war. Within a fortnight of continuous bombardment, sections of Riverrun's walls showed visible cracks. Great chunks of stone had fallen, leaving piles of rubble at the base. But Riverrun was no fragile keep, and Edmure Tully had clearly prepared. The moat had been flooded, turning the approach into a quagmire. Ladders and siege towers sank or slipped in the muddy banks. Each day, the Lannisters lost men in fruitless attempts to storm a breach that turned out to be not as wide as it looked. Meanwhile, the Tully defenders took casualties as well, their ranks growing thinner. The sight of crows circling above the fortress told Jaime that the defenders had their share of dead. No single assault had succeeded in taking the castle, but collectively, the Tullys were being battered into submission. Then came word that the northern lords loyal to Robb Stark might attempt to march south again to relieve Riverrun. Jaime's scouts brought conflicting reports, but rumor held that the young wolf had reappeared somewhere near the twins, demanding passage. Walder Frey was playing both sides, as was his wont. If he allowed Stark through, the Tullys might be rescued and the Lannister siege undone. If he refused, the boy would remain stymied. Jaime weighed these possibilities. He reasoned that Walder Frey, cunning to the bone, would only side with the Starks if they offered him more than Tywin was willing to. Tywin's coffers were deep, but the Tullys and Starks had long relationships with the Freys. Negotiations behind the scenes would determine the outcome. Jaime decided to accelerate the siege. If Riverrun fell before Robb arrived, the boy would have to fight a losing battle or retreat again. In either scenario, House Lannister emerged stronger. At dawn, Jaime ordered a massive assault on a portion of the western walls already weakened by weeks of bombardment. 5 siege towers rolled across the churned mud, accompanied by a hail of arrows from Lannister archers. Catapults fired continuously, some aiming for the walls, others launching projectiles directly into the courtyard in hopes of shattering the defenders' morale. The thunder of wood and stone filled the air. Shouts reverberated, horns blared. Jaime himself stood at the rear, observing. He could have led the charge in typical Jaime fashion, but he knew that this was not a melee in open ground. It was a siege, and a commander was needed to direct the entire operation. Besides, he yearned for the day when he could ride forth in glorious single combat. But that time was not now. One of the siege towers reached the wall and latched on with its heavy grapples. A drawbridge slammed down, bridging the gap between tower and parapet. Lannister men-at-arms scrambled across. The Tully defenders rushed to meet them with pikes and swords. Men fell from the walls, screaming as they plummeted into the moat. Smoke billowed from parts of the tower, which the defenders had set aflame with pitch. Meanwhile, engineers rushed to bring up a battering ram, hoping to force one of Riverrun's smaller gates. The entire scene was chaos incarnate. Jaime clenched his fists, urging the men on with curt commands, riding along the lines to make sure no one wavered. Amid the pandemonium, a cry went up that the western wall had partially collapsed. A large section of the crenellations crumbled under the stress of repeated hits from the trebuchets. Dozens of Tully defenders vanished in a cloud of stone dust. Through the swirling debris, Lannister infantry began to pour into that breach, sloshing through the moat's shallow edges. The fighting was fierce. Archers rained arrows from nearby ramparts, but the volume of attackers was overwhelming. Slowly, with great cost, the Lannisters established a foothold on the inner side of the wall. The Tully defenders, outnumbered and battered, fell back toward the courtyard. The smell of fire, blood, and fear was thick in the air. Jaime saw his men crest the rubble pile and converge on the battered courtyard. Here, the Tully knights rallied for one last stand, led by a grizzled commander wearing the red and blue trout sigil. Jaime did not see Edmure Tully. Possibly he was too injured to fight or locked away deeper in the keep. The last stand was desperate. Knights on both sides clashed, warhammers smashed into breastplates, swords sliced through chainmail, men screamed and died. Gradually, the Lannisters gained ground. Soon, the Tully survivors were cornered, forced to yield or face slaughter. Jaime spurred his horse closer to the gap in the wall, picking his way over the debris to witness the final moments of the fortress's downfall. Surrender came in a wave of sobbing men dropping their arms. A white banner was hoisted on the battlements by a trembling squire. The commander who had rallied them stood with blood trickling down his face from a deep cut along his scalp. "We yield," he cried, voice cracking. "We ask for mercy." A hush descended. Lannister men stared at him. Some spat, others jeered. But Jaime raised an arm, calling for order. There would be no pointless butchery if the fortress was truly his. If Edmure Tully or any other highborn lord was still alive, they would be valuable hostages. Jaime gave the order to accept the surrender, disarm the defenders, and secure the fortress. Mercy, or something close to it, would be extended provided no further resistance was met. In the aftermath, Jaime rode into Riverrun's courtyard, passing under the shattered archway with the Lannister banner in hand. He dismounted, surveying the scene, the ground slick with blood, the keep's walls scarred and broken. Smoke rose from several fires, which men hurried to extinguish. Prisoners were herded into lines, stripped of weapons. Off to the side, Jaime saw a group of Tully archers kneeling in surrender, their eyes hollow. Somewhere in the distance, he heard the wailing of women from the castle's interior. This was the price of war. As Jaime moved through the courtyard, he reflected that none of this might have been possible if he'd been taken prisoner that night in the Whispering Wood. Would the Lannisters have mustered so effectively? Might Robb Stark have forced Tywin to compromise or to exchange hostages? In that alternate reality, House Lannister's fortunes could have been gravely diminished. But here, in this reality, Jaime Lannister walked free, covered in the dust of a victorious siege. He found Edmure Tully in the Great Hall, half propped up on a makeshift sickbed. The Lord had a bandaged leg and a pale, drawn face. He looked at Jaime with undisguised loathing. Jaime bent slightly at the waist, a mock courtesy. "My Lord Tully," he greeted. "Riverrun has fallen. You are my prisoner." Edmure's lips curled with bitterness and he spat at the floor near Jaime's boots. "You will regret this," he muttered. "The North will not forget." Jaime shrugged, the steel shoulders of his armor moving with an elegant sound. "The North remembers, or so they say. But you must hope your nephew returns in time to save you." Edmure's scowl said more than any words. Jaime had the man disarmed and placed under guard, though not overly harsh guard. A lord hostage was worth more alive than dead. Besides, Jaime liked to think he was not the sort of brute who took pleasure in pointless cruelty. Securing the rest of Riverrun took the next few days. The Lannister host garrisoned the castle, though parts of it were crumbling and needed urgent repair. The small folk sheltering within its walls were frightened but compliant, especially after they saw that most Tully knights had surrendered. Jaime's men put out any lingering fires, replaced Tully banners with Lannister lions, and rationed out what food remained. The Tully larders were not as well stocked as he'd hoped, but it would suffice for a time. Meanwhile, Jaime sent swift riders to inform Tywin of their success. Riverrun was the key to the Riverlands, and now it belonged to House Lannister. As the dust settled, Jaime allowed himself a moment's rest in the fortress's solar, gazing out the window at the rivers that converged below. The water, once a symbol of Tully pride, now bore silent witness to a new occupant. With Riverrun secured, the Lannisters exerted control over surrounding territories. Many smaller river lords, faced with the unstoppable might of the lions, bent the knee or at least paid lip service. Jaime demanded hostages from each, usually sons or nephews, to ensure their compliance. This was Tywin's strategy: keep the local nobility in line by holding their heirs. The brutality might have been quieter than on some other fronts, but no less effective. The war was not over, though. Robb Stark and his northern host, diminished but not destroyed, still lurked beyond the Twins. With Riverrun fallen, the boys' alliance with the River Lords lay in ruins. Jaime was certain that if Robb returned, he would find no easy allies here. And the boy, short on men and resources, might be forced to conduct a defensive war in the north, ceding the south to the Lannisters, Tyrells, and Baratheons to slug it out amongst themselves. Jaime held court in Riverrun's Great Hall, once the seat of House Tully. It felt strange to sit on the dais, overlooking the high table that had once been Edmure's place. Yet he was the victor, and the men looked to him as the commanding presence. Ser Adam Marbrand stood at his side, along with a smattering of lesser knights. Prisoners were paraded forth, petty criminals who had looted supplies or fought the Lannisters in violation of the terms of surrender. Jaime listened with half an ear and dispensed judgments he hoped might be seen as fair but firm. A few were sentenced to the dungeons, a few were flogged. Others were pardoned outright. When it was done, Jaime retired to a side chamber that had once belonged to Riverrun's steward. A simple desk was scattered with maps, letters, and raven scrolls. He poured himself a cup of watered wine, sinking into a wooden chair. He felt weary, but it was a triumphant weariness. That night, the wind howled outside Riverrun's walls, blowing from the north. There was a chill in the air. Jaime found himself on one of the parapets, gazing over the ramparts. The moon glimmered on the rivers below, and the fortress lay mostly in darkness. Thoughts spun through his mind unbidden: Cersei, Joffrey, Tyrion, Tywin. And then the slender shape of Brienne of Tarth flickered into his memory, not that he had met her in this version of events, for they were never forced into that awkward captivity exchange. Yet somewhere, in the swirl of possibility, he recalled the rumors of a lady knight who served Renly. It was odd how life branched in unexpected directions. Had he been captured at the Whispering Wood, his entire story would have twisted. Perhaps he would have met that towering wench. Perhaps not. The memory was like a phantom haunting his thoughts. He shook it off. The next morning, a raven arrived with word that Robb Stark had indeed managed to cross the Twins, but only after negotiations that left Walder Frey's alliance uncertain. Some said the boy had demanded safe passage in exchange for betrothing himself to one of the Frey girls. Others claimed Walder Frey had refused him outright, forcing Robb to ride north in a more roundabout route. The messages were conflicted. But one thing was sure, the young wolf was not marching on River Run anytime soon. He was bound for the Neck, presumably to fortify Moat Cailin. Jaime breathed easier. River Run was Lannister territory now, and the Tully garrison had yielded. Edmure Tully was a hostage. The war in the Riverlands was all but won. His father would be pleased. In the days that followed, Tywin himself sent an entourage to River Run, led by Kevan Lannister. With them came additional men to garrison the castle and a small retinue of skilled stonemasons to repair the breaches. Kevan congratulated Jaime on a swift victory, though Jaime laughed at the word swift. Months of siege were hardly swift. But Tywin's brother was a practical man and recognized that the fortress had fallen more quickly than if the Tullys had enjoyed uninterrupted supply. Kevan brought fresh orders from Tywin. Jaime was to hold River Run and stabilize the Riverlands, while Tywin marched east to face the threat of Stannis or any other claimants that might dare to contest the Iron Throne. Jaime was now the Warden of the Riverlands, or so Tywin declared by royal command. It was a lofty title, one that turned the corners of Jaime's mouth up in a small smirk. Warden, Protector. Perhaps it was a fancy name for man who ensures we keep the Tullys in check. Jaime settled into this new role, though it chafed. Holding a fortress was not nearly as exciting as leading charges or dancing on the battlefield. But with the war raging across the realm, it was a key post, and Tywin's trust meant a great deal. Whenever a letter arrived from Cersei, Jaime read it in private, relishing her words, though they sometimes seethed with anxieties about court politics and the intrigues swirling around Joffrey. She complained about Tyrion's influence as Hand of the King, about the Tyrells' growing sway, about the chaos that threatened the city. Jaime wrote her back in coded phrases, promising that once the war was settled, he would return to her side. For now, he was needed in the Riverlands. Under Jaime's watch, the Lannisters continued to pacify the region. A few holdouts loyal to the Tullys attempted resistance, but they were soon crushed by well-armed patrols. The small folk resented paying fresh taxes to their new overlords, but many surrendered to the inevitable. Harvests were uncertain. Rumors said the coming winter would be harsh. The crown demanded grain. The Lannisters demanded loyalty. Through it all, Jaime tried to maintain at least a semblance of order and discipline, though men like Gregor Clegane made it challenging. The mountain was prone to cruelty and pillage. Jaime reminded him that House Lannister needed to rule this land, not raise it. Gregor's eyes held a dull, dangerous light, but he bowed his head eventually. Even the mountain understood that Tywin's word was law, and Jaime's word was Tywin's. As autumn deepened, messengers traveled between River Run and King's Landing more frequently. The war took its toll. Stannis attacked King's Landing and was repelled by wildfire at the Blackwater. Tywin Lannister arrived in time to seal the victory. And the Tyrells officially sided with the crown, forging an alliance through Margaery Tyrell's betrothal to Joffrey. The city erupted in celebrations and schemes. Meanwhile, Jaime remained in the Riverlands, continuing to hold his father's conquest. After the Blackwater, the threat of Stannis waned, but other challengers remained. Balon Greyjoy was stirring in the west, threatening the coasts. The north was still up in arms, but with Moat Cailin well defended and Robb Stark refusing to surrender, a stalemate of sorts arose. That quiet front only existed because neither side saw advantage in renewing hostilities. Robb had fewer men, Jaime had River Run, and the war's center of gravity had shifted south. The stories of the young wolf might remain half-forgotten in these southern lands. Yet the memory of that fateful night in the Whispering would remain vivid in Jaime's mind, a testament to how close he had come to captivity. In those calmer weeks, Jaime found himself occasionally wandering River Run's halls, half curious about the Tully legacy. The stone corridors were lined with tapestries of fish and river motifs, reminders of a proud house that had lost its seat. He wondered about Catelyn Stark, the Tully daughter who had married Ned Stark. Had she grown up dancing through these halls? Had she once dreamed of a life unspoiled by war? Now, her father was dead, her brother a captive, and her house under Lannister control. Jaime felt a flicker of pity, but he brushed it aside. War demanded winners and losers. The Tullys had lost for now. Edmure Tully recovered from his wounds slowly, and on occasion Jaime would visit him under guard. Their conversations were short and barbed. Edmure hurled accusations at Jaime, murderer, usurper, tyrant. Jaime returned them with a casual shrug. He was certain Edmure was desperate for news of his nephew, Robb, but Jaime had little to offer. Last I heard, your precious young wolf roams the neck with half a host, uncertain where to bite next, Jaime might say. Edmure would glare, but the truth was plain. The North had lost the momentum when the Whispering Wood trap failed to capture Jaime. The consequences radiated outward like ripples in a pond. Winter's chill arrived early that year, blanketing the Riverlands in frost and limiting some of the Lannister patrols. Supply wagons moved carefully over frozen roads. The siege lines that had once ringed Riverrun were dismantled, replaced by a ring of newly built fortifications to keep out any raiders. The battered walls of the castle were mostly repaired, though the newly placed stones and mortar looked mismatched, a patchwork of old Tully strength and Lannister additions. In the bleakness of a cold morning, Jaime would don his cloak of white, an echo of his days in the King Guard, though he was no longer stationed in King's Landing nor at Joffrey's side. The cloak was more symbol than station now, a nod to the legacy of the Kingslayer. He walked the battlements, mindful of the hush that lay over the land. The rivers below were crusted with ice in the shallower parts, the fish half hidden beneath the glimmering surface. Sometimes he saw a hawk or raven perched on the parapets, staring at him as if judging him for his choices. When the snows threatened to become thicker, Jaime contemplated leaving a large garrison at Riverrun and returning south to be closer to Cersei. Yet Tywin's letters urged patience. The Riverlands needed continued oversight. Tywin was busy in King's Landing, ruling his hand, forging new alliances, orchestrating the wedding of Joffrey to Margaery. He wanted Jaime to remain the visible arm of Lannister power in the region. So Jaime stayed. He drilled the men, improved fortifications, tried to ensure that the local lords did not rebel. It was not the life he had dreamed of. He was a warrior, not a castellan, but it served the family's interests. And at times, Jaime found a strange contentment in the routine, though a part of him yearned for the thrill of the field. A messenger arrived from Harrenhal one day, bearing tidings that Roose Bolton had seized the great ruin in the name of the North. That was reason for concern, as Harrenhal commanded a strategic position. But Tywin's reply was calm. Let Bolton hold the cursed castle if he wished. The Lannisters had no immediate plans to dislodge him, so long as he posed no direct threat to Riverrun or King's Landing. War, Jaime realized, was not always about securing every stronghold but about focusing on what truly mattered. The Northmen were spread thin, and the alliances they once relied upon were fraying. The Karstarks had parted ways with Robb Stark, angry over the perceived mishandling of certain matters. The Freys were half in, half out. The Tullys were neutralized. A kingdom at war was a kingdom of shifting sands, and Jaime could do little but watch from his vantage point, ensuring no surprising wave of hostility overtook them. In quieter moments, he recalled the prophecy of the ghostly wind in the Whispering Wood. Had it truly whispered warnings that night? Or had it been mere trees and superstition? If the trap had worked, Jaime would have lost his sword hand, or so one rumor from a captured northern soldier suggested that Robb Stark intended to maim him for the sake of revenge. But perhaps that was just talk. Still, Jaime's right hand flexed, unscarred, as if testing whether the illusions were real. The sword hand that had slain Aerys Targaryen still remained intact, and so did his quick reflexes. It was a gift or perhaps a curse, depending on one's perspective. But no, Jaime was certain that living free was better than rotting in a cell. The winter winds blew across the realm, biting and sharp. Settlements across the Riverlands huddled for warmth, storing what grain they could. An uneasy truce of sorts fell over the war. The Iron Throne was stabilized under Joffrey, with Tywin pulling the strings. Renly was dead, Stannis licked his wounds, and Balon Greyjoy reaved the west but had not marched inland. Robb Stark still claimed kingship of the north, but he had no direct path to recapturing the lost Riverlands. And so the world turned, balanced on a knife's edge. Jaime Lannister, the proud lion who once never dreamed of commanding a castle other than Casterly Rock, now governed Riverrun in his father's name, ensuring that House Lannister's hold remained secure. In the crisp light of a new morning, as the frosted grass glinted beyond the fortress gates, Jaime walked the battlements alone, listening to the hush of the rivers. He gazed toward the horizon, where the land gently rolled into misty hills. Beyond those hills lay the path north, to Harrenhal, to Moat Cailin, and eventually to the great expanse of the north. He wondered if the young wolf might someday attempt a daring stroke, or if the boy was too weakened by circumstances to threaten them again. Likely the latter, he mused. The tide of war had shifted the moment Jaime refused to be captured. And so it was that House Lannister stood ascendant while House Stark and its allies hovered in uncertainty, pinned behind their fortress in the neck. No great victory in the field had sealed the North's fate, only a narrow escape in the Whispering Wood and the relentless cunning that followed. The quiet around Jaime pressed closer, broken only by the distant call of a raven. He turned away, cloak trailing behind him, and descended the steps into Riverrun's inner bailey. War was not over, but his presence here proved that sometimes a single twist of fate could upend the destiny of kings. If the wind in the wood had whispered that night, perhaps it had whispered, Jaime Lannister would remain unbound. And in remaining unbound, he had changed the course of the entire realm. Jaime Lannister awoke to the rasp of a frozen wind rattling the shutters in the steward's chamber. He had appropriated these modest quarters from the Tullus upon taking Riverrun, and though months had passed, he never found the place wholly comfortable. Even with a fire crackling in the hearth, the Riverland's winter chill seeped under the door. He pulled a cloak of fine gray wool over his shirt, feeling an old stiffness in his sword arm. Perhaps it was the cold in his bones, or perhaps just the memory of too many battles. The war had slowed in some ways since King's Landing repulsed Stannis on the Blackwater, yet bloodshed still simmered across the realm in scattered pockets. Jaime's duties remained constant, holding Riverrun in the name of House Lannister, keeping the Riverlords subdued, and ensuring that word of any northern incursion reached him before it could gather strength. The high window let in a thin, wintry light. He gazed at dust motes floating in that icy glow, recalling the day he had first taken these rooms. Then chaos had filled the corridors. Tully men subdued, Lannister soldiers rummaging for supplies, the walls battered from siege engines. Now, the keep was quiet, though not peaceful. Tension lived in every stone. Jaime ran a hand through his hair. He missed Cersei with an ache as deep as any wound, but Tywin continued to insist he remain in the Riverlands, and Jaime could not gainsay his father, nor did he truly wish to return to the swirling intrigues of King's Landing. Though he hungered for the closeness of the Queen, he had never been one for the viper's nest of courtiers. He strode to the hearth and stirred the dying embers with an iron poker. A swirl of orange sparks illuminated the half-burned wood, a fleeting warmth that vanished too quickly. When he straightened, he thought of how easily sparks died in a cold wind. The same might be said for rebellions. If you kept them starved of air, they withered. The Tully cause, once so strong with the North backing it, had dwindled since the fall of Riverrun. Whatever flickering hope remained among the Riverlords was smothered by the knowledge that the Lannisters controlled every crossing, every key stronghold, and could unleash punishment at will. A rap sounded at the door, and Jaime barked a curt invitation to enter. One of his captains, a lean man named Ser Durant, stepped inside and bowed. He wore the lion badge on his cloak. His breath curled in the cold air as he spoke. "My lord, we have had word from the outposts near Acorn Hall. Riders with the dire wolf banner were spotted in the woods." That got Jaime's attention. He laid the poker aside and fixed Ser Durant with a measuring stare. "Stark men, or so they claim?" Ser Durant nodded. "Yes, my lord. They had gray-cloaked outriders and at least one banner with the gray direwolf. Our scouts believe they were no more than 3 dozen, possibly a scouting party. They melted away into the forest when confronted." Jaime's lips parted with a trace of amusement. 3 dozen wolves strayed from their pack. Or perhaps the young wolf is testing our defenses yet again. He turned to a small table bearing a large map of the Riverlands. His hand hovered over the approximate location of Acorn Hall. "If he thinks to retake any portion of these lands, he must be mad. We have the castle garrisoned and enough outriders to spot any large force. Still, keep a close watch. The northern scouts are tricky. If they appear in one location, they might be luring us from another." Ser Durant waited for further orders. Jaime toyed with a charcoal pencil, tapping it lightly against the map's edges. "Finally," he said, "send another patrol to reinforce our men near Acorn Hall, and have them sweep the villages. If they find any trace of Stark loyalists, they are to deal with them quickly. Remind them we want prisoners if they can manage it. Live captives speak louder than corpses." The captain bowed, then hesitated. "Yes, my lord," he murmured, eyes flicking up to Jaime's face. "There is something else." A group of traveling merchants arrived at dawn, seeking refuge in the castle yard. They claim they're from Maidenpool, heading west. They have wares to sell. "I've ordered them searched." "Good," Jaime replied. "Let them pay a toll in coin or goods for the privilege of passing through. We'll decide after the search if they're truly merchants or a front for spies. If you find them honest, let them sell to our men. The soldiers could use new boots and some furs. Winter creeps in and we can't have half the garrison freezing." Ser Durant acknowledged that and withdrew. Jaime listened to the footsteps fade. Once he would have scarcely bothered with such mundane tasks. He was a knight of the King's Guard, a man of action, not a quartermaster or a steward. Yet war had forced new roles upon him, and he found that paying attention to details kept the fortress steady. If the men were well supplied, if the roads were watched, if rumors of rebellion were stamped out, Riverrun would remain firmly in Lannister hands. He left the steward's chamber, winding through corridors hung with old Tully tapestries. The fish sigil featured heavily along with scenes of past triumphs. One tapestry depicted a marriage alliance centuries ago, a swirl of bright threads. Jaime wondered how many lords had walked these halls in better times, proud to call themselves Tully men. Now the corridors were patrolled by lions. The few servants who had stayed behind bowed to him or avoided his gaze altogether. Their faces were drawn with the knowledge that he was the conqueror and, effectively, their jailer. Entering the great hall, he found a small group of Lannister men taking breakfast, bread, stewed apples, and watery ale. A few turned to salute him, but Jaime gestured for them to keep eating. He had no appetite at the moment, only a faint restlessness that tugged at him. He passed under the tall arches and stepped out into the courtyard. The sky was the color of a whetstone, clouds piled high, promising the day might remain cold but mercifully without fresh snow. On the far side of the courtyard, a cluster of wagons and mules stood near the stables. No doubt these were the traveling merchants. Soldiers were inspecting barrels, crates, checking for hidden blades or contraband. The merchants, a man and woman of middling age, stood by anxiously, hats in hand, waiting to see if they would be allowed to remain or forced to move on. Jaime made his way over, curious. One of his soldiers, a veteran crossbowman named Tulliver, saluted. "My lord, these two claim they've goods from Maidenpool. You can see the casks of salted fish, some cloth, a few casks of strong wine. I've checked for hidden compartments, seems clean. They also have a half-dozen wool cloaks. Good quality." Jaime eyed the nearest cloak, running his palm over the fabric. Indeed, it was well-woven, thick. He turned his attention to the man and woman. "You might find yourself with eager buyers if your prices aren't absurd. But let's be clear, we have no tolerance for spies or smugglers. Try to conceal anything or harbor enemies of the crown, and you'll die for it." "Yes, lord," the man stammered, bowing repeatedly. The woman echoed him. Their fear was palpable. They knew these lands had turned dangerous since the war began, and few travelers felt safe. Jaime studied them a moment longer, then nodded to Tulliver. "Let them trade for the day. They'll pay a toll in coin or goods enough to supply a few squads with new cloaks. Then let them be on their way by sundown." Tulliver said, "Aye, my lord." Jaime walked off without another word, boots crunching on the half-frozen ground. His breath smoked before him. Glancing at the castle walls, he saw guards stamping their feet for warmth. On the battlements, the Lannister banners hung limp, the wind having died. Above the southwestern tower, once reserved for Tully archers, a single lion standard fluttered in lazy folds. He imagined the Tully trout lying dormant beneath it, forced into a silent subjugation. He turned again, intending to inspect some repairs being done along the western walls when he spotted a rider trotting through the gatehouse. The soldier wore the colors of House Brax, a minor Westlander house sworn to the Lannisters. He carried a leather pouch slung over one shoulder, a messenger, most likely. Jaime pivoted to meet him. The man swung off his horse, bowed. "My lord Jaime," he said breathlessly, "I have dispatches from King's Landing." "And from your father." "Hand them over," Jaime replied. He accepted the sealed letters, noting Tywin's familiar lion sigil in wax. The other missive bore the stag lion seal of King Joffrey, likely a royal command or some piece of official nonsense. Jaime split the Lannister seal first, scanning the heavy parchment. Tywin's handwriting was neat, unadorned, each line filled with crisp directives. "Riverrun must remain under your watch. Reports indicate Robb Stark still lingers near the neck, though the Freys harass his supply routes. Bolton holds Harrenhal for now, but our main concern is the Greyjoy threat on the western coasts. If you can spare men, see them dispatched to the Westerlands to strengthen the coastal garrisons. Joffrey's wedding is planned for early next year. Your presence may be required in King's Landing then, but only if the Riverlands are secure enough to be left in another's care." Jaime breathed out slowly. The wedding. He had received earlier letters about it. Joffrey was set to marry Margaery Tyrell, forging a bond with Highgarden. It was being lauded as the wedding of the age, sure to be a spectacle of lavish feasts and costly pageantry. Jaime tried to imagine the swirl of lords and ladies and found himself strangely unmoved. His nephew, though the world believed Joffrey to be Robert Baratheon's son, was a king in name, a monster in temperament, but still kin. Jaime had half a mind to stay as far away from the boys' tantrums as possible. But if Tywin demanded his presence, he would ride south. He moved on to the next letter, the official one stamped with Joffrey's seal. Unrolling it, Jaime snorted. An invitation to the royal wedding. Flowery language about the grace of the king, the joy of the realm. No doubt it had been dictated by Cersei or perhaps by the Tyrells to make Joffrey look more regal. Buried near the bottom was an official request. Lord Jaime Lannister, Warden of the Riverlands, is bidden to attend the festivities at the Red Keep, with a retinue befitting his station. The letter was verbose. He skimmed it, then folded it away. The wedding was months off. There was time to decide the best course. He'd likely have to attend, unless the war flared in some new direction. The messenger cleared his throat. "My lord, I'm instructed to return with any replies you wish to send to the hand." Jaime nodded. "I'll have a letter ready by midday. Go stable your horse and warm yourself. There's hot broth in the kitchens. Tell them you have my permission." The man gave a grateful bow and departed. Jaime lingered in the courtyard, turning a slow circle, thinking of how the realm had fractured like a shattered mirror. Each shard glinted with its own reflection of power. Tywin's letter implied that the Greyjoys were attacking the Westerlands, likely sacking harbor towns. With the north in partial chaos and House Stark pinned behind Moat Cailin, the Ironborn found easier prey along the coasts. Tywin wanted more men for the west. Could Jaime spare them? Possibly. The Riverlands were subdued, thanks to Edmure Tully's captivity. But a single flicker of rebellion could grow into a blaze if the local lords smelled weakness. He would not be hasty in withdrawing troops. He made his way along the curtain wall, stepping over patches of ice. He found a vantage point that overlooked the Red Fork, the river shining with scattered shards of ice. Below, a line of fishermen's huts stood vacant. Once, the Tullis had fish stocked so plentifully that even a winter's I did not hamper them. Now fear and the war had drained the life from these banks. Jaime could see men from his garrison dragging planks across the yard, presumably to shore up the gatehouse. The presence of daily tasks almost lulled him into a sense of routine. But war never truly slept. As he turned away, footsteps crunched behind him on the walkway. He recognized the steady stride of Ser Adam Mar Brand, one of the knights who had once been part of his cavalry. The older knight had a grizzled beard and calm brown eyes, and he inclined his head respectfully. "My lord, I bring a piece of news that may interest you." Jaime waited, eyebrow arched. Mar Brand continued, "We've heard from travelers that Lord Roose Bolton is not content to remain at Harrenhal. He's looking to parley with the Freys or with any southern lord that might further his cause. No one seems certain if he stands with Robb Stark or if he's merely using the boy as a shield for his own ambitions." Jaime let out a short breath. He had never quite trusted the man called the Leech Lord. Bolton is no fool, but he's slippery as a greased eel. If Robb Stark's star is dimming, perhaps Bolton sees a chance to shift allegiance. Still, the Dreadfort is in the north and Harrenhal is a cursed ruin. Let him have it. Unless he means to march on Riverrun, which he won't attempt alone, we have little to fear. But keep me informed if he starts forging alliances with the Riverlords. Mar Brand dipped his head. "Of course, my lord." Then he paused, fiddling with the hilt of his sword. "I also wanted to ask if you had considered the request from the west. The letters your father sent. Do you intend to send men to shield the coastline from the Ironborn?" Jaime watched a gull wheel overhead, far from the sea. "I'm considering it. The safe choice is to hold my numbers here and let Tywin handle the Greyjoys. But that might displease him. He wants decisive action. I'll do what's best for our house and for the Riverlands as Tywin entrusted to me. In a fortnight, we'll have a better sense of whether Robb Stark intends to break south again or continue to lick his wounds. If we see no sign of a northern offensive, I might dispatch some outriders and maybe 1,000 foot to reinforce the coasts. But that depends on fresh scouts." Mar Brand's lips curled in a tight smile. "Prudent. I'll see to the scouting then." He bowed. "By your leave." Jaime nodded and Mar Brand departed. Left alone, Jaime gazed off toward the edges of the horizon. This was not how he had pictured war when it began. Indeed, he had once hoped to force a swift confrontation, crush the Starks in open battle, and return victorious to King's Landing to Cersei's arms. Instead, the war had become a sprawl of shifting fronts and half-battles, searing so much of the countryside. And yet, from a certain angle, House Lannister's fortunes were better than they might have been if Jaime had fallen into Stark hands that night in the Whispering Wood. He reminded himself that the difference between victory and ruin could be as small as one misstep. He had avoided that misstep thus far. When midday arrived, he returned inside, drafting a letter to Tywin, a brief account of conditions in the Riverlands and his intention to wait before sending any large contingent west. He wrote more carefully than usual, ensuring the words exuded confidence without sounding dismissive. Tywin loathed dithering. Once finished, he sealed it with the Lannister lion and sent the messenger on his way. Afterward, he paid a visit to Edmure Tully, as he did every so often, to gauge the man's morale and glean any sense of what the local lords might be whispering. Edmure's captivity remained relatively mild. He was confined to a tower room well guarded but comfortable enough, with a small hearth and adequate furs for warmth. Jaime ascended the spiral stairs, boots echoing in the hollow shaft. 2 guards stood outside the door. They saluted as Jaime approached. One unbolted the door, letting him in. The room smelled of old rushes and stale air. Edmure sat at a wooden table near the arrow-slit window, grooming his patchy beard. His wounded leg had largely healed, but he still walked with a limp. He shot Jaime a glance of pure loathing. "I trust the furs are sufficient?" Jaime inquired lightly, strolling inside and letting the door close behind him. Edmure only grunted. The Tully lord's face had a sallow cast, and lines of anger pulled at his mouth. He was not the carefree man who once laughed at feasts. War had etched sorrow into him. "I don't want your concern," Edmure spat. "I want you and your lions gone from my home. There'll be no peace in the Trident while your banners fly over this castle." Jaime eyed him. "Alas, you must endure our presence a while longer. My father would be displeased if I simply abandoned the fortress. And you, my lord, should be careful. If I decided to move you to the dungeons, you'd have far fewer comforts." Edmure opened his mouth to retort but seemed to think better of it. He set down the wooden comb and folded his arms. "Have you come just to gloat?" "Not quite," Jaime said, resting a hand on the back of a chair. "I wanted to ask whether you've heard any word from your bannermen. Sometimes a raven finds its way to your window, or a guard might talk out of turn. It would be far easier for you if you told me of any rebellious stirrings. The alternative is that I remain suspicious." A bitter chuckle escaped Edmure's lips. "You want me to betray my own? House Vance, House Piper, the Lannisters? You'd prefer I bend my knee to the lions? I'll tell you nothing. I am no oathbreaker. This is Tully land, Tully soil. One day the North will come, or the tides will turn, and you'll regret it." Jaime raised a hand, cutting him off. "I see your stubbornness remains intact. Still, let me remind you, House Tully is dethroned here. Your father is dead, your sister is in the north or traveling gods nowhere with her precious wolf son, your niece Sansa is betrothed to King Joffrey, though from what I hear, that arrangement changed when Marjorie Tyrell came into the picture. The realm moves on while you languish in this tower. If you want to see Riverrun stand at all, be pragmatic. You'll remain lord in name only, but your people might be spared further misery." Edmure's cheeks darkened. "What do you know of my people's misery? Men like you and your monstrous brutes roam the countryside, demanding fealty, demanding grain. Our farmlands burn, our small folk starve. You talk of mercy, but you know nothing of it." Jaime fought a stab of annoyance. "You might be surprised. But enough. I have your answer, no cooperation. Fine. Remain in your tower and pray the war does not shift in ways that make you worthless as a hostage." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. His voice softened a fraction. "You should be grateful Robb Stark never had me. Your nephew's cause would have benefited from exchanging me for Sansa or Arya, or for you. That possibility died with the Whispering Wood. Without that lever, he lost more than you'll ever know." A taut silence followed. Edmure's glare bored into Jaime's back. He said nothing. Jaime lifted a shoulder in a shrug and rapped on the door. The guard opened it and Jaime exited, feeling the tension in his spine. He descended the stairs, stepping back into the corridor. Perhaps it was petty to bait Edmure Tully, but the man's hostility sparked Jaime's own. House Tully's pride was unbroken even in defeat. Yet as far as Jaime could see, that pride only prolonged their suffering. Sighing, he made his way to the solar, where a brazier gave some relief from the winter cold. He settled into a chair, letting the flames warm his face, drifting into thought. The days turned to weeks. The roads remained passable, albeit treacherous with ice. Jaime dispatched small contingents westward to aid the coasts, though not so many as to leave Riverrun vulnerable. Scouts reported minimal northern activity aside from the sporadic appearances of dire wolf riders near the western fringes of the Riverlands. Most likely, these were small outrider bands testing the Lannister lines. Occasionally, the scouts clashed with them in brief, savage fights. Each day, Jaime reviewed the casualty reports, names of men lost in skirmishes, men who froze to death on the roads, men taken by local bandits or broken men. War consumed them like a bottomless maw. News continued to filter in from King's Landing. Tyrion Lannister, having survived the Blackwater, was at odds with Cersei. Tywin ruled his hand, making alliances, preparing for the grand wedding. The North was in disarray, especially after the Karstarks turned on Robb Stark when he refused them vengeance for some perceived slight. The boy had lost a chunk of his host. Rumors also claimed Robb had secretly wed some minor noble's daughter in the Westerlands, thus offending Walder Frey, who had expected a marriage match. That potential rift could be catastrophic for the Stark cause. Jaime saw a certain grim irony. If Walder Frey felt spurned, the young wolf might be forced to fight on two fronts, or to seek new terms. It was the kind of folly that Tywin relished exploiting. As winter deepened, a light snow began falling over Riverrun. Jaime stood on the ramparts, watching the flakes swirl. The water below glinted with cold, and the sky was the hue of hammered iron. Despite the gloom, he found a certain stark beauty in the landscape. He recalled days of riding freely under golden sun, Cersei's laughter in his ears. Now everything was cold, subdued, as if the land itself was caught in the war's breathless lull. He was drawn from his reverie by a call from one of the guards. Glancing down, he saw the gates swinging wide for a small party of riders approaching from the north. They bore the banner of House Frey, white and blue, twin towers. Jaime's heart quickened. Walder Frey had played a pivotal role in bridging or dividing alliances. What brought his men here in the dead of winter? He hurried down the staircase and into the courtyard as the riders dismounted. The leader, a lean, pale fellow with watery eyes, introduced himself as Ser Ryman Frey, a grandson of Lord Walder. He bowed stiffly. "Lord Jaime, I bring greetings from my grandsire. He begs leave to speak with you on a matter of mutual interest." Jaime motioned for the riders to follow him into the great hall, away from the cold. Torches and braziers lit the cavernous space in flickering gold. Ser Ryman removed his gloves, blowing into his hands for warmth. Jaime studied the man. Like many Freys, he had that hint of calculation in his stare, an eagerness to curry favor. "Tell me your news," Jaime said, gesturing for a servant to bring mulled wine. "Lord Walder is a cunning old man. I doubt he sent you without cause." Ser Ryman cleared his throat. "We have heard the northern boy, the one they call king in the north, is traveling south once more, presumably to treat with certain lords or to strike unexpectedly. We are not certain, but we suspect he means to cross the Trident in one place or another. My grandsire wishes to coordinate with House Lannister in blocking such a crossing. He knows you command the Riverlands, and as we hold the twins, we have mutual interests in preventing the boy from forging alliances. If he tries to pass near the twins or the Green Fork, we can stymie him. But we'd need your help if he attempts a crossing west of us." Jaime sipped the wine that had just arrived, letting the spiced aroma fill his senses. "And what does Lord Walder want in exchange?" "The Freys never do anything out of courtesy." Ser Ryman pressed his lips together. "It's quite simple, my lord. The old man wants official recognition and favor from House Lannister. A royal decree confirming the Freys' rights over certain lands around the twins, lands once in dispute with the Lannisters and others. And he might like a marriage alliance with the Lannisters or, failing that, a highborn match that cements his position. With so many new wards and betrothals swirling, it seems a prime moment to secure his family's future." Jaime nearly laughed. Lord Walder had more children and grandchildren than fleas on a stray dog, and he meant to marry them off to whomever guaranteed him status. "Let me guess," Jaime said. "He wants a red carpet rolled out for one of his brood to wed a Lannister cousin or some suitably lofty match. My father must be thrilled." He shook his head. "I can't make such promises on Tywin's behalf, but I can convey the request. As for the disputed lands, if the Freys remain loyal, I doubt my father will begrudge them a few more muddy fields. Still, we must see proof of loyalty." Ser Ryman bobbed his head. "My grandsire is quite prepared to demonstrate that loyalty. If the young wolf tries to pass near the twins, he'll find the gates shut and the crossing bristling with spears. If the boy attempts to ride west and cross into your territory, we shall send ravens so you may intercept him. Lord Walder only asks that we coordinate our movements." Jaime was thoughtful. Lord Walder's cooperation could indeed be valuable. Cutting off the Stark boy at every crossing might drive him to desperation. possibly forcing him to either attempt an ill-advised assault on the twins or to vanish back north. That would leave the Riverlands safely in Lannister hands. "All right," Jaime said. "Tell your grandsire we are open to collaboration. I'll write to my father about his requests. But the final decisions rest with the hand of the king. You Freys must uphold your part. If the boy tries to cross, give us swift warning." Ser Ryman smiled, revealing yellowing teeth. "We shall, my lord. I'll remain here a day or two to finalize any details. Then I'll ride back and convey your words to Lord Walder." After the Freys were shown to accommodations, Jaime stood in the near-empty hall, swirling the last of the mulled wine in his cup. The aroma was sweet, but the taste was bitter on his tongue. The Freys were notoriously fickle. If it suited them, they would betray the Starks. If it suited them later, they might betray the Lannisters. Yet, in the current climate, with Robb Stark alienating them by refusing a Frey bride, their loyalty to Lannister gold and power was more certain. By cornering Robb in the neck, they all but assured the war's southern front would remain quiet. Jaime suspected that might pave the way for something more violent in the future. Men like Walder Frey rarely settled for half measures. If the opportunity arose to crush the Starks, the old man would do so with relish. In the days that followed, correspondence flew back and forth. Jaime relayed the Frey proposals to Tywin, who responded with measured approval, so long as Walder Frey accepted official recognition of Lannister overlordship in the Riverlands. Tywin also hinted that the Freys might soon be rewarded with new titles, perhaps one of the dormant lordships in the area, if they proved themselves indispensable in neutralizing the North. No direct mention of a Lannister marriage was made, but Tywin suggested in his curt, formal style that matches might be considered once the war is concluded. Jaime chuckled to himself. Typical father, offering just enough to keep the Freys on the hook. Shortly before the new year, the river iced over more heavily, and thick snow blanketed the fields around Riverrun. The fortress itself remained largely free of deep drifts, thanks to men assigned to keep the walls and courtyard clear, but the countryside lay under a white hush that made travel difficult. Messengers began to arrive on foot or with sleds rather than horseback. Jaime's men patrolled less frequently, though they maintained constant vigilance at roads and fords. Many of the villages had retreated behind shuttered windows, waiting for the worst of winter to pass. A grim stillness gripped the land. During one of these hushes, Jaime dreamed of the Whispering Wood, of shadows slipping between the trees, a sense of entrapment closing around him. But in the dream, he did not escape. Instead, he felt steel jaws snapping shut, manacles biting his wrists. He woke with a start, heart pounding. It took him a moment to remember that no, he had eluded that night's trap. He was the victor, not the prisoner. The memory still unsettled him. Too close, he thought again, shaking off the remnants of fear. Sometimes fate hinged on a single misstep. If his men had pressed forward just a little faster, or if he had not noticed the glint of moonlight on hidden pikes, the entire realm might be different. He tried to let the tension bleed away, rising to poke the dying embers in his chamber hearth and reassure himself he was still free. He forced himself into his daily routine, checking on the men, receiving local petitioners, reviewing supply inventories. Word came that the coast of the Westerlands was in chaos under the Ironborn raids, but that local lords were uniting to fight them off. Jaime decided against sending more troops in the heart of winter. Marching men in heavy snow could cost more lives than it saved. He also heard from King's Landing that the wedding preparations for Joffrey and Margaery Tyrell were extravagant. 7 days of feasting, a special tournament, even rumors of a naval mock battle on the Blackwater. Jaime read these dispatches with a weary snort. Let the boy king have his pageantry. The war's ugliness would not vanish beneath flower garlands. Then came a new complication. A raven arrived bearing a message from a sworn sword of House Mallister at Seaguard, who claimed the Ironborn threatened to push inland along the Blue Fork. If they advanced beyond certain villages, they might disrupt Lannister supply lines to the north and hamper any movement of troops. Jaime recognized the name of the Mallister envoy, a knight famed for his skill at sea, but he was not sure if the man wrote in good faith or if he was trying to manipulate the situation to his own advantage. House Lannister had bent the knee to the Lannisters under duress, but they still despised them. Yet it was plausible that the Ironborn, with Theon Greyjoy's bold campaigns in the north, might also test the Riverlands. Jaime wrote back that if the threat was real, House Lannister had the right to defend its territories, but any request for Lannister aid would require proof of the Ironborn infiltration. He had no intention of sending men on a wild chase that could leave Riverrun exposed. The daily monotony was broken one frozen dawn when horns sounded from the western ramparts. Jaime hurried there, fastening his cloak. He found the guards peering into the swirling snow. A small band of riders was approaching, no banners visible at first. But as they drew nearer, the watchman spotted a sigil, the direwolf of House Stark. Jaime's heart thumped. Who would dare approach Riverrun openly with that banner? Had the boy come in a parley attempt? The gatehouse captain signaled a readiness to repel any assault, but the riders, fewer than a dozen, came in peace with white squares of cloth fastened under their direwolf banners. Jaime ordered the gates opened cautiously, archers at the ready. The riders entered at a slow walk, exhausted by travel. They wore furs and cloaks crusted with ice. At their head was an older man with gray-streaked hair, bearing a sword at his hip. He dismounted stiffly in the courtyard, meeting Jaime's gaze with a guarded expression. "I come under a flag of truce," he announced in a hoarse voice. "I serve King Robb Stark, though I bear him no illusions. Our numbers are few. We ask safe conduct and audience with Lord Jaime Lannister." A hush fell. Lannister men stood around, hands on swords, uncertain whether this was some trick. Jaime took a step forward, letting his hand rest on the pommel of his own blade. "You have found him," he said. "What could a servant of the king in the north wish from me, here in Riverrun?" The man inclined his head, though not a full bow. "My name is Ser Wendell Manderly, a knight from White Harbor. I bring an offer, or at least a plea, from my lord." Manderly's cheeks were chapped red by the cold, but his voice was firm. "We know House Tully has fallen under your control. We know you hold Edmure Tully captive. The North can no longer sustain an endless war. My lord, King Robb, wishes to negotiate terms. An exchange of hostages, perhaps, or a cessation of hostilities in the Riverlands, if your father will permit. The North seeks only to be left in peace behind Moat Cailin." Jaime studied the older knight, a flicker of surprise crossing his features. The Manderlys were among the most loyal Stark bannermen, and for them to come forward meant Robb Stark was truly desperate. "Terms," Jaime echoed. "You speak as though the war can simply end with a handshake. My father will want homage. He will want oaths of fealty from the North, or at least acceptance of King Joffrey's rule. Why would Robb Stark yield, having crowned himself king in the North?" Ser Wendell's eyes flickered. "The boy was crowned, yes, but he is not blind to reality. If an honorable peace can be made, one that spares further bloodshed, that might allow the North to govern itself under certain conditions, he would consider relinquishing some claims. My instructions are only to open talks, my lord. I can say no more, but if you grant us safe passage to speak with you or to send word to your father, an agreement might be reached." A swirl of curiosity and calculation tightened Jaime's stomach. If the North was truly ready to treat for peace, that could shift everything. But was this real or a ploy to lure men into a trap? He flicked his gaze to the courtyard archers. If these men tried anything, they would be pincushions in moments. They didn't appear to be suicidally reckless. He nodded once. "I'll not speak for the king or the hand, but we can at least discuss the matter. Surrender your weapons for the duration of your stay, and you'll be housed under guard. I'll send word to my father that you've come. If you behave yourselves, you might leave here alive." Ser Wendell Manderly's shoulders sagged slightly in relief. "You have my thanks, my lord." He unbuckled his sword belt, handing it over. His companions followed suit, though a few looked pained to relinquish their steel. Jaime had them escorted to a secure wing of the castle, not as dire as dungeons, but certainly not comfortable quarters either. He had no illusions about their loyalty. They would free Edmure Tully in a heartbeat if given the chance. So he placed double guards on Edmure's tower as well. After sending ravens to King's Landing and to Tywin's nearest outpost, Jaime waited. Days stretched on. The presence of Stark envoys in Riverrun caused a stir. Lannister soldiers sneered or muttered curses when they passed the Manderly men in the halls. Jaime forbade any violence against them. These visitors might represent an opportunity to end the war in one corner of the realm. If that happened, House Lannister could turn its attention elsewhere. Perhaps Tywin would even permit Jaime to return to King's Landing. The thought brought a faint longing for Cersei's arms, though he knew the capital was hardly a haven. Finally, a reply arrived from Tywin, curt and methodical. Hear them out, but make no binding promises. Demand full fealty to King Joffrey if the North wants peace. They may keep Robb Stark as Lord of Winterfell if they bend the knee, surrender hostages, and release all southern lands. The letter ended with a reminder: the ruin of House Stark remains an acceptable outcome if they refuse. Jaime read it, tapping his fingers on the parchment. His father was never one for half measures. He wanted total submission or a war that destroyed the enemy. Still, if the Starks were desperate, perhaps they would bend. Summoning Ser Wendell Manderly to a smaller council chamber, Jaime laid out Tywin's demands. A single brazier provided warmth, illuminating the carved wooden walls. Jaime wore plain doublet and breeches with a short sword belted, while Manderly, lacking his own blade, sat stiffly on a bench. 2 guards hovered near the door. Manderly listened in silence as Jaime relayed the terms. When Jaime finished, Manderly exhaled. Full fealty to the boy King Joffrey, hostages, release of all lands south of Moat Cailin. My lord, I cannot guarantee King Robb would accept that. He still calls himself king in the north. Jaime's mouth twisted in faint sarcasm. He may call himself the unicorn of Skagos if he likes, but a king with no allies and fewer men does not strike fear into my father's heart. If the boy wants peace, he must accept reality. The Iron Throne will not abide a second kingdom. And your people have cause to want an end to war. Need I list how many of your young men have died in these battles, or how the northern villages must be faring with winter's approach? Manderly's jaw tightened. You speak true about the suffering. We have lost many, and the cold in the north is harsher by far. Yet we must keep our honor. Honor. Jaime's laugh was short and rough. I recall how your king in the north flouted House Frey by refusing a marriage. Honor did not stop him from offending Walder Frey. Nor did it save his father's head from the King's Landing block. War is about power, Ser Wendell, not illusions of chivalry. Manderly looked pained. I am a knight, sworn to House Stark. I only do what I can to spare more bloodshed. Will you allow me to write to my lord, detailing these terms? Perhaps he can see reason if the alternative is utter ruin. Jaime gave a crisp nod. Yes. My father encourages negotiation if it leads to Stark submission. Write your letter. I'll dispatch a raven or a rider north. But be warned, if your boy king dawdles, the next thrust of the war may well come from us. And it will be no gentle tap. Manderly nodded gravely as though he understood the futility of argument. Jaime waved a hand, dismissing him. The older knight departed under guard, leaving Jaime alone. He sank into a seat, trying to imagine Robb Stark's reaction to Tywin's demands. The boy had once seemed unstoppable, winning swift victories across the Riverlands, nearly capturing Jaime. Now, with so many allies gone and his host diminished, the king in the north faced the humiliating prospect of yielding. Would he do so? Or would he choose a doomed fight? The next day, Manderly penned his letter. Jaime read it before sending, ensuring no hidden codes or pleas for uprisings. The text was straightforward, a plea to Robb to consider the cost of continued war, an outline of Tywin's demands, a suggestion that the North might remain largely self-governing if they bent the knee. Jaime arranged for a reliable rider to carry it to the neck where Manderly's men said Robb was last known to be encamped. Weeks could pass before an answer arrived, if it arrived at all. In that waiting period, Jaime occupied himself with typical duties, overseeing the garrison, scouring rumors of bandits, ensuring the roads were passable for supply carts. He also found time to practice swordsmanship with a few trusted knights. The cold bit at their fingers, breath steaming in the winter air as they clashed steel in the castle yard. Jaime was still an impressive swordsman, though he felt a subtle stiffness in his shoulders these days, a reminder that time and the burdens of command weighed on him. Some days, the men clapped at his display of skill when he bested an opponent in a flurry of strikes, but Jaime felt no true elation. It was a release, nothing more. Meanwhile, the Manderly men remained under guard, though they were treated decently, housed in an old guest wing near the kitchens, fed well enough. Jaime noted they kept quiet, rarely speaking to the Lannister soldiers unless necessary. Ser Wendell wore a mournful look as though fearing that the North's doom was inevitable. The weeks dragged. Snow fell intermittently, building in drifts against Riverrun's outer walls. Scouts reported minimal activity from the north, only that certain lords like the Boltons and Umbers were quarreling among themselves. The phrase sent messages complaining of Robb Stark's cavalry sniffing around the Green Fork, but no large-scale attack materialized. By midwinter, Jaime was starting to suspect that Robb might never send a reply. Perhaps the boy had decided that even an impossible stand was better than kneeling to Joffrey. Then, one morning, horns blared at the gates again. This time, it was not a direwolf banner but one of Walder Frey's envoys, accompanied by a handful of Lannister outriders. They brought startling news. Robb Stark had been intercepted by Frey scouts near Oldstones, an ancient ruin on the banks of the Blue Fork. The boy was traveling with a small retinue, possibly on his way to treat with some river lords. An armed confrontation flared up, leaving dead on both sides. Robb himself escaped, but rumor had it he was wounded. Jaime listened in the great hall as the Frey envoy recounted the skirmish. "We nearly had the boy," the man said. "He had but a few dozen riders. If Lord Walder had sent a larger force, he might have been captured right then and there. As it was, Robb Stark fled northward. He left behind 2 of his banners and half his men, including some wounded. Our men gave chase but lost them in the thick woods. King Robb was said to be favoring his left arm and bleeding from the side." Jaime mulled that over. If the boy was indeed wounded, his mobility was compromised, and with so few men, he posed no real threat. Unless he reached friendly territory. "And where's he headed now?" Jaime asked, though he knew the Frey had little more information. The envoy shook his head. "North again, presumably, or perhaps to meet the Lannisters or Blackwoods in secret. We don't know. Our patrols are scouring the roads." After the envoys departed, Jaime gathered his captains. If Robb Stark was weakened and stranded in the Riverlands, this was the ideal moment to corner him. But that might require braving the deep winter. "I'll not send half our army chasing ghosts in the snow," Jaime told them. "But we can dispatch a few experienced search parties. If Robb is truly only a few steps ahead and wounded, we might catch him by surprise." Ser Adam Marbrand agreed. "A quick force of horsemen, well provisioned. We know the land better than he does by now. If we succeed in capturing him, the war effectively ends. Or at least, the North loses its champion." So it was decided. Within days, Jaime mustered a force of 100 horse and 200 foot, chosen for their endurance in rough conditions. He placed Ser Adam Marbrand in joint command with a younger knight named Ser Davin Lannister, a cousin of theirs, known for his cunning. The plan was to comb the forests near Oldstones, extending outward, setting ambushes at likely crossings. Meanwhile, Walder Frey would coordinate from the twins, blocking any route north. Jaime himself would remain at Riverrun. He was loath to leave it unguarded in case this was a Stark feint. But he felt a pang of envy for those riding out to the chase. A younger Jaime would have led the hunt personally, thriving in the thrill of battle. Now he was tethered to command, to caution. Ser Wendell Manderly begged an audience before the force departed, anxious. "My lord, if King Robb is wounded, I ask that you respect the flag of truce. We came here seeking peace. If he learns that your men ride after him..." Jaime interrupted, "Peace or no peace, your king is still an enemy. If he chooses to surrender, we'll hear his terms. But if he insists on skulking through my territory, what do you expect? My father demands fealty, not a half-signed letter of good intentions." Manderly's shoulders slumped. "You'll kill him, then?" Jaime pressed his lips in a thin line. "If he fights back, quite possibly. If he yields, I'll take him captive for my father to decide his fate." He saw the despair in Manderly's eyes and added, "Your presence here might yet help. If Robb tries to parley, you can remind him that we once considered peace. But you can't expect me to let the boy roam free, stirring rebellion." Manderly lowered his gaze. "I suppose not," he whispered. Jaime had no words of comfort. This was war, so the search parties rode out. The days that followed were rife with tension. Every morning, Jaime woke to scan for new messengers or ravens. The hush of snow blanketed the fields, muffling the clang of arms. If Robb Stark was still in the Riverlands, he was well hidden. Reports trickled in of small skirmishes in the woodlands, the capture of a few Stark loyalists who had parted from the main group. None could confirm the boy's location. Some claimed they saw fresh tracks near a frozen stream, leading north, but a sudden snow erased them. It was an eerie game of cat and mouse, one that cost more lives than it should. Men froze to death or died of infected wounds from minor sword scratches in the brutal cold. Winter was as deadly as any army. During this time, Ser Wendell Manderly grew increasingly anxious, though he kept his composure. Edmure Tully remained sullen in his tower, hearing fragments of rumor from the guards. Jaime remained outwardly calm, though inside, he felt the old stir of excitement at the thought that the king in the north might be brought in chains to Riverrun. That would be a final, crushing blow to House Stark's rebellion, matching in some ways the victory Tywin had long craved. But fate seldom moved in straight lines. One morning, a battered courier arrived from Ser Adam Marbrand's company. The man collapsed in the courtyard, half frozen, and was rushed to the kitchens to thaw by the fire. Jaime hurried there, finding the courier wrapped in blankets, steam rising from his soaked clothes. His face was pale, lips cracked, but he managed to speak. We found him, my lord," he said through chattering teeth. "Near the old hills west of Oldstones. He had perhaps 10 men left. Ser Adam's outriders cornered them. A skirmish. Robb Stark took an arrow in the shoulder. Looked mortal. Then a group of outlaws attacked us out of nowhere. There's chaos in those woods. Stark's men scattered. Ser Adam was wounded, too. They retreated. The boy vanished again." Jaime's frustration flared. Outlaws? Bloody criminals interfering in our search. The courier's nod was weak. "Yes, my lord. Could have been remnants of Beric Dondarrion's band, or common brigands, or some sworn swords to Stark disguised as outlaws. We can't say. The snow was thick. We tried to pursue, but night fell and we lost all tracks. Ser Davin was last seen regrouping near a burned village. The men are half-starved cold. We need reinforcements or a chance to break off the hunt. An arrow in the shoulder might well be lethal in these conditions if it festered. Robb Stark could be dying in a ditch somewhere. But lacking a body, lacking proof, Jaime could not claim victory. He cursed under his breath. "All right, you've done what you can. Warm yourself. I'll send orders to Ser Davin to continue searching for a few more days, then pull back if Stark cannot be found. We'll have to trust that if the boy is that badly wounded, he won't reach the twins or any friendly castle." The courier nodded gratefully and Jaime left. Outside, the courtyard seemed more desolate than ever, the sky the color of a sword's edge. A dusting of fresh snow coated the ground. Jaime stared at the swirling flakes, a heavy feeling settling in his chest. So close again. The Stark boy was proving just as elusive as he had been cunning in earlier battles. But cunning no longer served him so well, not in this winter domain. Perhaps the cold would kill him if the arrow did not. Yet Jaime wanted certainty, something to show his father, something that would truly end this portion of the war. His men continued searching for another week. Then, on a day of biting winds, Ser Davin himself returned to Riverrun, looking gaunt and weary. He gave Jaime a terse report in the hall, no sign of Robb Stark's body, nor any living remains of his party. They found a few corpses in the snow, unrecognizable after scavengers had had their fill. Some wore wolf badges, but none wore a crown or any sign that they were the king in the north. The outlaws had melted away as well, leaving behind footprints that vanished in ice. The hunt was fruitless. Jaime ran a hand through his hair in frustration. So we do not know if Robb Stark is dead or alive. For all we know, he limps north with an arrow in his shoulder and a chest full of regrets. Ser Davin just grimaced. "My lord, the men are near mutinous from hunger and cold. We had to return. Winter is no season for extended campaigns." Jaime ground his teeth but nodded. "Understood. Let them rest. We'll fortify our positions along the roads. If the boy tries to slip by again, we'll catch him. If not, so be it." Internally, he felt the sour taste of anticlimax. War so often ended in uncertainty. As the new year crept closer, the realm sank deeper into winter's grasp. Jaime began preparing for a journey to King's Landing. It was risky to leave Riverrun, but Tywin had made it clear that Joffrey's wedding would be a grand affair, and the presence of the Kingslayer, though rarely referred to by that name in official letters, would signal Lannister power. Jaime considered leaving Ser Adam Marbrand to command in his stead, or perhaps Ser Davin. The question was whether Edmure Tully might attempt something in his absence. But with most local lords subdued and with the winter snows as a natural barrier, it seemed feasible. He felt a pang of reluctance, for Riverrun had become strangely familiar. Yet the lure of returning to Cersei was strong. And if the king in the north was truly dying of an infected wound in some ditch, there would be no new threat from that quarter. The small risk of a last-minute Stark resurgence paled in comparison to the potential benefits of reuniting with his father and sister in the capital. War was not only fought on battlefields, deals and alliances shaped the outcome every bit as much as swords. Thus, on a bitterly cold morning, Jaime summoned the castellan he had appointed over the fortress, an older man named Horace Miller, originally from Lannisport, and gave him final instructions. You will maintain the same watch patterns, guard Edmure Tully well, and keep Ser Adam Marbrand informed of any suspicious movements in the region. Should Robb Stark miraculously appear with an army, send ravens immediately. Otherwise, remain loyal, keep discipline. House Lannister rewards faithful service. Horace Miller bowed earnest in his acceptance. Jaime then held a smaller ceremony in the Great Hall, announcing that Ser Adam Marbrand would be the acting commander, while Horace oversaw day-to-day matters. Edmure Tully would remain a hostage, though treated with courtesy as before. Ser Wendell Manderly and his men would remain as well, unless they chose to return north to deliver the message that peace terms still hovered in limbo. In truth, Jaime doubted those men wanted to risk the crossing again in the dead of winter. Manderly might remain until the roads thawed. Before departing, Jaime visited Edmure Tully in his tower one last time. The prisoner looked up from where he sat, reading a dusty tome. Edmure's expression was unreadable. "Leaving me alone to freeze, Kingslayer?" he muttered. Jaime sighed. "I'm bound for King's Landing, but do not imagine you'll find freedom in my absence. My men remain and they'll guard you well. If you show any sign of stirring revolt, you'll regret it." Edmure gave a hollow laugh. "I can scarcely stand without limping. You needn't fear me leading a charge down the corridors. But know this, I pray every night for a day when that lion banner falls from Riverrun's walls." Jaime's mouth twisted. "Pray all you like. The gods seldom listen." With that, he turned and took his leave, feeling a dull weight in his chest. War had a way of forging bitterness that no flame could melt. He spent the remainder of the day assembling his traveling party, 50 mounted men-at-arms plus squires and servants. They would carry ample provisions, though the journey to King's Landing in winter was not a trivial affair. Still, the main roads were marginally maintained, and they would pass through Harrenhal's region, where Roose Bolton was said to hold a precarious command. Jaime found the prospect of crossing Bolton's territory irksome, but Tywin's letters had indicated that the Leech Lord had no interest in provoking a Lannister force without cause. Finally, on the morrow, under a dim sky streaked with pale morning light, Jaime Lannister rode out of Riverrun's gates. He wore his gilded armor, polished but bearing the marks of real campaign. A thick cloak lined with fur draped his shoulders. His men followed, the column winding down the road that led east before curving south. Behind them, Riverrun's walls stood tall, battered in places but still formidable under Lannister rule. Jaime did not glance back. He focused on the road ahead, the winter wind stinging his cheeks. As they made their slow progress, the riverlands stretched out in a white hush. Strip trees lined the roads, branches rattling in the wind. Occasionally, they passed a small hamlet or a farmstead, half abandoned in the cold, the few remaining folk watching nervously from doorways as the Lion's riders went by. No welcome was offered, but no hostility either. The people had learned caution. Jaime found himself remembering the swirl of images from the siege, from the earliest battles. War had changed him, though he was loath to admit it openly. He had once yearned for glory above all, for that shining moment of victorious steel. Now he saw the wreckage strewn in victory's wake. After several days' travel, the party approached the expanse of land overshadowed by Harrenhal's monstrous towers. The silhouette of the ruined castle loomed against the winter sky, a jagged line of black stone. Smoke curled from a few places, suggesting it was partially inhabited. True to the rumors, Roose Bolton's banners flew above the gatehouse, a flayed man on pinkish cloth. An unsettling symbol, especially in the half-light of a wintry day. Jaime reined in, gazing at the monstrous edifice. He had never much cared for Harrenhal, too large, too cursed. But they would likely need to pass through or around it to continue south on the main roads. A mounted group of men emerged from the battered gates, wearing Bolton's colors. Their leader bore a standard of parley. Jaime's men tensed, but Jaime signaled them to wait. The Bolton riders approached. At the head was a pale, soft-spoken man wearing mail under a cloak trimmed with fur. He inclined his head to Jaime. "My Lord Lannister, I bid you welcome to Harrenhal. I am Steelshanks Walton, in service to Lord Bolton. We have no quarrel with you. If you wish safe passage, my lord invites you to lodge here for a night, to share what hospitality we can provide." Jaime considered the invitation. Roose Bolton was not a friend, but apparently he was not an immediate foe either. Tywin's instructions had been to maintain a cold neutrality if Bolton did not provoke them. On the other hand, spending the night in Harrenhal might expose them to hidden danger. He studied Steelshanks's face. The man was hard to read. Finally, Jaime shrugged. "Very well. If Lord Bolton intends no treachery, we'll accept. A night indoors might spare my men's toes from frostbite. He signaled his party to follow. They rode through Harrenhal's colossal gates, past courtyards that could have housed entire armies. The place seemed half empty. Soldiers in Bolton livery stood about in small groups, watchful but not aggressive. The walls loomed overhead like the bones of dead giants. Jaime felt an unwholesome chill, suspecting the old curses lingered here. But a roof was a roof. They were guided to a portion of the castle that had been made livable, boards covering the worst holes, fires burning in great hearths. Servants, suspiciously quiet, showed them to chambers. Later, Jaime was summoned to sup with Lord Roose Bolton himself in a vast, echoing hall that had once been used for banquets. Now, long tables stood mostly empty, with just a small spread of bread, cheese, salted fish, and a bit of roast. Bolton sat at the high table, seemingly unruffled by the cold or the gloom. He was a pale man with dark, shadowed eyes, wearing a fine doublet of pale pink and white, a flayed man embroidered in subtle thread on the breast. He rose as Jaime approached. Lord Jaime, an unexpected pleasure. Jaime dipped his head in a gesture of courtesy. Lord Bolton, I hear you claimed Harrenhal some time ago. How fares this castle in winter? Bolton gave a faint smile. It is too large, too full of ghosts. But it suffices. Fewer mouths to feed now than in autumn. Please be seated. We have little variety to offer, but the food is warm. Jaime took a seat, motioning for his men to stand behind him. Bolton's close attendants hovered at the edges of the table. Servants appeared to pour watered wine and bring plates. Jaime took note of a tall, lanky man with an unsettling stare. This must be one of Bolton's favorites. The air smelled of damp stone and roasting meat. Conversation began stiffly. They spoke of the harsh winter, the reduced foraging, the scattered outlaws. Bolton inquired about Tywin's health and the king's upcoming nuptials, with a mild politeness that suggested deeper curiosity. Jaime answered briefly, keeping watch for any sign that Bolton harbored illusions of continuing the northern cause. At length, Bolton leaned forward, steepling his fingers. You know, I once rode with the young wolf. The boy was bold, though lacking in caution. He lost that which he needed most, leverage. And now he's wounded, if rumors speak true. Jaime raised an eyebrow. You keep your ear to the ground, I see. He sipped his wine. And do you remain allied with him? Or are you simply biding time? Bolton's pale eyes flicked up. I remain allied to House Bolton, my lord. The boy's downfall was inevitable once he lost your captivity as a bargaining chip. The phrase turned against him after the marriage slight. The Karstarks fractured, and the boy found himself cornered. I do not oppose House Lannister's domain over the Riverlands, nor do I see any profit in continuing a fruitless war. My men are comfortable here, for now. Jaime snorted softly. You sound like a man who might prefer to shift alliances again, if it served you. But I care little, so long as you don't trouble our lines. I'm riding to King's Landing for the royal wedding. After that, we'll see whether the North has any fight left. If you find the boy, I suspect you'd sell him to the highest bidder. Bolton's smile was thin. I might show him a kindness if it advanced my cause. Yet in these times, kindness is rarely rewarded. Better to show loyalty to the powers that be. Houses Bolton and Lannister need not be at odds. Jaime nodded. Fine. Then we understand one another. I'll be gone at first light, if the weather permits. He glanced at the meager spread on the table. Thank you for the courtesy of a warm meal. They ate in relative silence. The salted fish and roast pig were decent, the bread a bit stale. Jaime felt eyes on him whenever he looked away. Bolton's men studied him like he was an exotic animal. He suspected they wondered how the famed Jaime Lannister had managed to remain free while the young wolf's fortunes collapsed. The truth was that life could hinge on the smallest pivot. After the meal, Bolton offered him lodging in a less drafty tower. Jaime accepted, though he did not sleep deeply. He posted his own guards, fully aware that Harrenhal was notorious for treacheries. But the night passed without incident. At dawn, Jaime and his column departed, the gates grinding open. Bolton's men watched them go, silent as ghosts. Jaime felt a weight lift as soon as Harrenhal's looming walls receded behind them. The roads south from Harrenhal were not much better. Patches of ice, snowdrifts, and sporadic sightings of outlaws. But the Lannister riders remained a formidable force. and most brigands steered clear. They passed the ruins of villages burned in earlier campaigns, the charred beams jutting from drifts of snow. More than once, Jaime glimpsed crows circling overhead. Death was a constant in these lands. Eventually, the terrain shifted to lower elevations, the air growing marginally milder. They saw the occasional column of smoke rising from homesteads that were not entirely deserted. By slow degrees, they drew nearer to the Crownlands. King's Landing lay ahead, a swirl of power and intrigue that Jaime had not seen in many months. He wondered how Cersei fared in the Serpent's Nest, how Joffrey was preparing for the wedding. Knowing his nephew, the boy was likely demanding over-the-top spectacles. Tyrion might have his hands full as master of coin, though perhaps that position had changed again as the court was ever shifting. At last, after countless cold nights in tents and meager inns, the travelers crested a rise and beheld the city in the distance, its walls and towers outlined against the pale winter sun. Smoke from thousands of hearths created a hazy canopy above the sprawl of streets. Beyond the city, Blackwater Bay stretched like a steel-gray mirror under the wan light. Jaime paused, letting out a breath. No matter what else might be said of King's Landing, it was the seat of the Iron Throne, the heart of the realm's power. This was the city where Ned Stark lost his head, where Tywin now pulled the strings of a precarious peace, where lords and ladies maneuvered as viciously as any battlefield. He urged his horse forward, flanked by his men, and began the final approach. Soon they joined the traffic on the King's Road, merchants, peasants, soldiers, travelers. The guards at the city gates recognized the Lannister banner and quickly waved them through. Crowds parted, murmuring as Jaime and his retinue passed. The gatehouse guards doffed their helms in respect. Once inside the walls, the din of the city enveloped them, the cries of street hawkers, the smell of sewage and roasting meats, the press of humanity. Jaime realized how long it had been since he'd endured this crush. The filth and clamor of King's Landing was an assault on the senses after the hush of the Riverlands. Yet there was something energizing about it too. They made their way toward the Red Keep, climbing the sloping streets past shops, inns, and manors. Folk craned their necks to see the gold armor, to glimpse Jaime's fair hair beneath his helm. A few recognized him as the Kingslayer, though none cried it aloud. Lannister power was too strong in the city. At length, they reached the castle gates, where gold cloaks of the city watch stood at attention. Jaime announced himself, and the guards quickly admitted them. Within the keep's walls, they dismounted in the outer yard. Stable boys rushed forward to take the horses, while officials in red and gold tabards approached to greet them. One such official stepped forth, bowing. "My lord Jaime, welcome back to the Red Keep. The Hand has been informed of your arrival. Quarters have been prepared in the White Sword Tower if you wish, or you may prefer the Lannister manse within the keep. Shall I show you the way?" Jaime inhaled the salt-tinged air from Blackwater Bay, tinted with the ever-present stench of the city's refuse. "My thanks. I'll go to the White Sword Tower first." He wanted to see if his old chambers as King's Guard were still intact. Officially, he remained in the King Guard, though he'd spent so long away on campaign that the lines had blurred. The man bowed and led the way. As Jaime followed through the courtyard, he caught glimpses of other arrivals, wagons bearing flowers and barrels of wine, masons erecting wooden stages, tailors fussing with bolts of cloth. The wedding preparations were in full swing. One corner of the yard was crowded with barrels labeled with the Tyrell Rose sigil, likely provisions from Highgarden. Servants bustled. Jaime felt a sense of looming spectacle. Soon, all the great lords and ladies would gather for Joffrey's nuptials, a swirl of politics as thick as any snowstorm. They climbed the stairs to the White Sword Tower, passing under the carved arch inside. The halls were dim, lit by torches. Jaime's footsteps echoed. He recalled the day he had been sworn into the King's Guard so many years ago, never imagining how life would twist. At the tower's upper levels, a chamber once reserved for him stood ready, recently swept and warmed by a small brazier. A bed with fresh linens stood in the corner. A table and chair completed the sparse furnishings. The official bowed and withdrew, leaving Jaime in the hush. He removed his cloak, slinging it over a hook on the wall, and paced the room. One slit window let in a wedge of daylight, illuminating the dust motes drifting through the air. He had returned. Part of him felt an urge to go to Cersei immediately. But he knew better than to barge into her chambers unannounced amid the frantic wedding preparations. He would find her soon enough. Instead, he paused at a small shelf where the white book was usually kept, the King's Guard's record of service. The large tome was absent, likely in the Lord Commander's personal study. No matter. Jaime reminded himself that official duties could wait. He needed to report to his father first, let Tywin know all that transpired in the Riverlands. He stripped off his armor, donned simpler clothes, splashed water on his face from a basin. Then he ventured into the Red Keep's corridors. Familiar tapestries lined the walls, new ones embroidered with lions and roses for the wedding. Servants bustled in and out of passages. Jaime navigated the labyrinth until he reached the tower where the Hand of the King maintained his offices. 2 Lannister guards stood outside. They recognized Jaime instantly, saluting smartly. One stepped in to announce him, then motioned him through. Inside, Tywin Lannister rose from behind a heavy wooden desk. He wore a doublet of deep crimson, a quill in one hand. His cool green eyes flicked over Jaime, noting every detail. "So, you have finally arrived," he said with understated gravity. "Report." Jaime advanced, bowing slightly out of habit. "Father, Riverrun is secure under my men. Edmure Tully remains a hostage. The region is subdued for the winter, though scattered outlaws persist. Robb Stark was wounded and last seen fleeing near Oldstones. We suspect he may be dead or close to it, but we have no body. I left Ser Adam Marbrand in command with a sizable force." Tywin nodded, setting down the quill. "Good. The war in the south has largely quieted. Stannis remains on Dragonstone, licking his wounds. The Greyjoys harass the coasts, but that is a lesser nuisance. The Tyrells have taken a prominent position in court. We are on the verge of unifying most of the realm under King Joffrey. The only holdout of note is the north. If Robb Stark is truly out of the game, the rest will fall in line." Jaime took a measured breath. "You'll have your wedding spectacle then. Joffrey and Marjorie will be crowned in splendor." Tywin's gaze sharpened. "Yes, though no thanks to Joffrey himself. The boy is difficult, but he remains the figurehead we need. You will attend the wedding in all your white-cloaked glory. The realm must see the Kingsguard's unwavering support." Jaime inclined his head. "As you will. I'd rather not linger in court intrigue, but if that's where I'm needed—" "You are needed to demonstrate the might and stability of House Lannister," Tywin said. "Your capture was nearly our undoing at the war's outset. Now your presence as victor cements our control. Appear at Joffrey's side. Let the realm see that the lion prevails." Jaime thought back to the fateful night in the Whispering Wood. If he had taken one misstep, Tywin might not be so composed now. Perhaps the entire war would have spiraled out of Lannister hands. Instead, here they were on the cusp of a new order. "So be it," Jaime said. "When shall I see the king?" Tywin sat again, picking up his quill. "Soon. He's busy tormenting those arranging the wedding. Cersei is likely with him. I'll send a page to inform her of your arrival. For now, rest. We'll speak more later. I have letters to finish." Jaime bowed again and left, mind swirling. He had returned to the capital, a man who had reshaped fate by not allowing himself to be taken in that fateful trap. He wondered what awaited him now in these halls. Perhaps new tests, new betrayals. At least Cersei was here, a constant thread in his life, though their bond was more dangerous than ever. Even so, he yearned to feel her arms around him again, to let the world fade for a time. As he walked the corridors, a stir of motion caught his eye. Servants stepped aside, bowing. Then he saw her emerging from a side passage. Cersei wore a gown of deep red, trimmed with gold. Her golden hair swept up in an elegant twist. She looked every inch the queen, though lines of stress furrowed her brow. The moment she beheld him, her lips parted in surprise. He moved closer, heart-pounding. For a moment, it seemed as though the war had never happened, as though they were the same two people who once carried on their secret affair. But they were older, more wary. The realm had changed, and so had they. Yet the longing in her green eyes was real, mirrored in his. "Jaime," she whispered. "You're here." "Finally." He took her hand, pressing it lightly. "I rode hard from Riverrun. I've missed you." She glanced around to ensure no one stood too close, though many in the Red Keep already suspected their closeness. "We must speak in private," she said quietly. "The wedding approaches, and Joff is restless." An ironic smile tugged at her lips. "We'll have dinner in my solar tonight. I'll dismiss the maids." Jaime nodded, feeling the heat of her presence like a flame in winter. For a heartbeat, the burdens of war, the memory of battles and sieges, the tension of the Riverlands, everything faded, replaced by the reckless desire that had once defined them both. But they were not children. They were conspirators in the greatest secret of the realm, one that shaped the Iron Throne itself. Duty and ambition enveloped them as surely as any cloak. He let her hand go. Until tonight, then. She gave a slight nod, stepping back, face regaining its mask of regal composure. Until tonight. Then she turned and walked away, servants trailing after her. Jaime watched her go, remembering a time they could have been carefree lovers in the Red Keep's hidden corners. Now everything carried the weight of crowns, war, and watchers. The rest of the day passed in a blur of formalities. Jaime visited the royal sept, where stonemasons prepared a dais for the wedding ceremony. He strolled past the great hall, glimpsing tapestries depicting golden lions and crimson roses newly hung for the festivities. He overheard the shrill voice of Joffrey scolding a hapless seamstress. The boy king wanted bigger ruffs, more extravagant sleeves, or some such nonsense. Jaime decided to approach Joffrey later when the boy's temper cooled. That evening, as darkness fell over King's Landing, Jaime slipped quietly towards Cersei's solar. A single guard stood at the corridor's entrance. Jaime's heart pounded. He pushed open the door to find Cersei waiting, curtains drawn over the narrow windows. A fire danced in the hearth. She wore a simple gown of green velvet now, less formal, and her hair fell loosely about her shoulders. In that moment, she looked more like the girl he had known than the queen who commanded the court. He closed the door softly behind him. They met in silence, her fingers brushing his cheek, his arms circling her waist. The war, the realm, all of it receded. She murmured his name, and he answered with hers. Their kiss tasted of memory and hunger. They had risked everything once for a love that was taboo. Some might say they still risked it. But they clung to each other as though there were no tomorrow. There, in the hush of her solar, with only the firelight as witness, they allowed themselves a fleeting moment of intimacy amid a world of harsh demands. Afterward, they spoke in low voices. She told him of the scheming among the Tyrells, the tension with Tyrion, the endless demands of Joffrey. Jaime described Riverrun, Edmure Tully, the uncertainty about Robb Stark's fate. They shared wine from a flagon on a small table, leaning close so no eavesdropper could catch every word. Outside, the wind rattled the shutter, carrying the city's distant clamor. Eventually, the conversation paused. Cersei traced a pattern on Jaime's palm with her fingertip. All these years, she whispered, we keep surviving. I remember how certain I was that Ned Stark's death would break us, that Robert's wrath would fall. Then it was war, the North in open rebellion, father's fury, rumors swirling. Yet here we are, Jaime. On the brink of victory. He glanced at the window, the reflections of the flames dancing on the glass. Victory, he echoed, bought with blood. I sometimes wonder if the price was too high. But perhaps that's foolish. The realm is never at peace without shedding blood. He thought of the small folk in the riverlands, the scorched farms, the men left rotting after battles. Yet he also thought of the boy who nearly captured him at the Whispering Wood and how differently things might have turned out. Cersei leaned closer, eyes glittering. We are the victors, or we will be after this wedding cements our power. The Tyrells are cunning, but father keeps them in check. Stannis is contained. The North is broken. We have only to secure the next steps. And that means you must be at Joffrey's side, reminding the world that the greatest knight in Westeros stands behind the throne. Jaime smirked, a ghost of his old arrogance returning. Well, if that's my role, I'll play it. Let the realm see the Kingslayer in white. A pretty picture. But inside he felt a note of hollowness. War had changed him, stripped away illusions. Still, he would stand where she needed him. For them, there was no other way. They lingered a while longer, the conversation turning to smaller matters, the hush of private jokes. But eventually, Jaime knew he must return to the White Sword Tower, lest tongues wag about how long he stayed. Their stolen hour ended with a last embrace, a promise that they would meet again soon. He slipped out into the corridor, the chill of the castle embracing him like a reminder of reality. Days passed. Jaime took up his nominal duties as a king's guard, though in truth, the order was overshadowed by the arrival of more important guests. Mace Tyrell marched in with a splendid retinue, his daughters in tow. The city bustled with lords from the Vale, the Stormlands, Dorne, all eager to witness the royal wedding or to curry favor. Though winter touched even the Crownlands, the Tyrell gold and bounty made the feasts lavish. The great September of Baelor was decorated with more flowers than Jaime had ever seen in one place, a riot of color in the drab season. Street peddlers hawked rose-shaped pies and lion-shaped trinkets. Musicians filled the air with lively tunes as though the war were forgotten. Jaime stood by the throne one afternoon as Joffrey and Margaery made an appearance, greeting a line of foreign dignitaries. The gold cloaks and Kingsguard flanked them. Joffrey wore a regal ensemble of crimson silk studded with rubies. His petulant face bore a forced smile as he endured pleasantries. Marjorie Tyrell, charming and graceful, responded with gracious words that soothed even the frostiest ambassadors. Jaime listened, half bored, half amused. A memory slid into his mind of a battlefield, the clang of steel. It felt worlds away from this perfumed chamber. When the ceremony day finally arrived, the city erupted in celebration. Bells pealed from the September. Jaime, dressed in his white cloak and polished mail, escorted Joffrey into the edifice. 1,000 candles glowed, illuminating the polished marble floors and tall pillars. Marjorie stood at the altar, radiant in a gown embroidered with vines and blossoms of gold thread. The High Septon waited to perform the rites. Lords and ladies packed the seats. The Tyrells and Lannisters formed the front rows. Cersei sat near the altar, face calm, eyes flicking now and then to Jaime. Tyrion was present too, wearing a carefully neutral expression. The wedding proceeded like a grand show, every motion choreographed. Joffrey placed a gilded crown on Marjorie's head. The vow exchange was accompanied by choral music. Onlookers cheered. Jaime stood behind the king, expression neutral, scanning the crowd for any sign of trouble. The realm's powerful families were all there, forced into a tableau of unity. He spotted Oberyn Martell among the Dornish, leaning with predatory grace. He spotted Peter Baelish smirking from a corner. Varys hovered like a plump spider. The air crackled with hidden agendas. But for now, the ceremony was all sweetness and light. After the vows, they moved to the feasting in the Red Keep's courtyard. Huge trestle tables groaned under the weight of roasted boar, venison pies, lemon cakes, and exotic dishes brought by the Tyrells. Casks of arbor gold were tapped, and the flow of wine was unending. Mummers performed japes, jugglers tossed flaming torches. Jaime sipped carefully, never trusting a large crowd entirely. He caught glimpses of Cersei, regal and proud, exchanging forced pleasantries with the Tyrell matriarch, Lady Olenna. The feast wore on, a swirl of color and sound. Joffrey reveled in the attention, at one point demanding an elaborate performance by dwarfs riding pigs. Some grotesque entertainment that made many guests uncomfortable. Jaime felt a pang of disquiet. This was the boy who sat on the Iron Throne, a child with lethal whims. He forced himself to remain outwardly impassive. He was the Kingsguard. He had vowed to protect Joffrey, even from himself if necessary. In the middle of the spectacle, Joffrey called for more wine. A squire hastened to refill the king's cup. Jaime noticed Tyrion hovering near the dais, a pained look on his face. Marjorie tried to distract Joffrey by pointing out some new delicacy. The boy took a long draught of wine, then slammed the goblet down, shouting insults. Jaime tensed. For a moment, it seemed Joffrey was about to lash out violently. The music faltered. Then the king coughed once, a sharp bark. Another cough followed. He rubbed at his throat, looking annoyed. The next moment, he coughed harder, eyes widening. A hush fell, then a ripple of confusion. Joffrey coughed again, more violently, stumbling. Jaime stepped forward as the boy dropped his goblet. Wine splashed across the table. Joffrey's face contorted, hand clawing at his throat. Marjorie cried out. Cersei rushed up, eyes frantic. Jaime reached Joffrey just as the boy sank to his knees. He was turning a ghastly shade of purple, choking. Jaime felt a sudden roar of adrenaline. Was this some assassin's poison? He tried to pry Joffrey's mouth open, but the boy was convulsing. Wine spilled from his lips, flecked with blood. Panicked screams echoed around the courtyard. Tyrion stood there, stunned, the fallen goblet at his feet. Joffrey's limbs thrashed, and he gave a final ragged gasp. Then he went still, eyes bulging. Cersei shrieked, cradling her son's body. Jaime felt numb horror. The king was dying, no, already dead or close to it. The music had stopped. The feast was in chaos. People scrambled away, some shouting for maesters, others pointing fingers. As Jaime stared at Joffrey's contorted face, a wave of surreal realization struck him. In all their carefully laid plans, in all the forging of alliances, they had not seen this coming. The War of the Five Kings had twisted again. Or perhaps it was a different war now. He heard Cersei screaming accusations at Tyrion. Guards rushed in. The crowd lurched. Time fractured into shards of confusion. Jaime knelt by Cersei's side, arms braced on the floor as she wept over Joffrey's lifeless form. Poison. The once Lion King was undone in an instant. Jaime wanted to comfort her, but the weight of the moment crushed him. He saw Marjorie reeling, the Tyrells rising in alarm. It was as though winter's chill had struck in the heart of a royal feast. In that chaos, only one thought struck him with clarity. No matter how thoroughly you plan, no matter what battles you win, fate has teeth. Had he been captured in the Whispering Wood, perhaps none of this would have come to pass. Or perhaps events would have twisted some other way. But here, in this moment, the dream of a secure Lannister rule under Joffrey's reign died with the boy on the feast hall floor. Cersei sobbed, cradling her son's head, eyes blazing with grief and fury. Jaime tried to steady her, but she flailed, commanding the guards, "Arrest Tyrion. He poisoned my son." The madness spread, courtiers fleeing or shouting. Jaime turned to see Tyrion standing alone near the dais, horror and shock on his face as gold cloaks seized him. The Tyrells pressed in, demanding an explanation. The wedding feast had become a funeral. The realm's future, so carefully orchestrated, lay shattered in a single, choking breath. Somewhere in that swirling storm of emotion, Jaime felt an ominous certainty that the war was far from over. In truth, a new war might have just begun. The Boy King had perished, and House Lannister would scramble to salvage power. Chaos threatened to blossom again, perhaps more dangerous than before. Jaime's thoughts flicked to the Riverlands, to the uncertain fate of the North, to the Iron Throne itself. Blood stained the floor, royal blood this time. And though Jaime was free of the Whispering Woods trap, he was as ensnared as ever in the realm's treacherous dance. He knelt by Cersei, feeling her anguish, sensing that the future was about to shift in ways none of them could control. The hall filled with the echo of wailing courtiers and the sharp ring of steel as men tried to restore order. Jaime could almost hear the mocking whisper of fate. One choice, one avoided capture, one pivot, and the entire realm spins on a different axis only to arrive at another cataclysm. There was no escaping the nature of power. It fed on blood, whether spilled in the dark of the Whispering Wood or on the brightest stage of a royal wedding. And so Jaime Lannister, triumphant conqueror of the Riverlands, found himself powerless before the final choking gasp of a poisoned king, a reminder that no mortal man could truly master the realm's shifting destinies.